When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, a decent respect requires that they declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these,
hello, everybody. How are you
life,
doing this evening?
liberty,
We're just waiting on Tom to get started, and then
and
we'll
the
be
pursuit
getting
of
going.
happiness.
Looking forward to a great one.
To
If
secure these
anyone
rights,
needs, it's on YouTube as well. But
governments
Tom
are
should be here any minute,
instituted
and then
among
we'll
men,
be getting going.
deriving their
Getting
just powers from the consent of the governed. And whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to establish new government. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, do and with the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved of all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. In the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
Okay, he'll be in about a second, so hopefully we'll get this thing going. I just spoke to him, so everything should be fine. And let's see if it is. There we go. Just wanted to make sure it was going on YouTube and all of that. And as I said, he'll be here in a second. We're looking forward to a really great discussion. For any of you guys who are wondering, I am Halsey English. I have a YouTube channel at Halsey English at YouTube. I also broadcast on X. We discuss geopolitics. We discuss American politics. We discuss health. We discuss life. Some people call me the right-wing Dr. Drew, but when all said and done, we're all just trying to have some fun and try to figure out what's going on with all of these situations. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Russia and the Middle East and Ukraine. I'm sure will come up. We will open up for questions after me and Tom have a bit of a throwdown and talk. I know we have a bit of a difference of opinion on what's actually going on over there, whether it be the Middle East or whether it be, oh, there we go. Okay, let me just give him permission. Okay. Hold on one sec. I just invited him to co-host. So, okay, perfect. Let's see. Tom, you there, buddy? You're muted if you are.
Yeah, I'm here. How you doing?
Excellent, excellent. Everything okay?
Yeah, I just thought that somehow I got it in my head it was an 8, not 7. Don't ask me why. So
It's because we're getting old, man. We're getting old.
because we said 8 last night, then we said 7, then we were like, oh, whatever. I just got done with the thing and was making coffee, so I'm on my way outside to
Perfect,
have a cigar
perfect,
and do the thing.
perfect. Okay, so why don't you tell everybody who you are, and then we'll get going.
I'm in this crowd. My name's Tom Luongo. I'm the publisher of Gold, Ghosts, and Guns, podcast, newsletter, blog, thing. I also write for Newsmax at Ultimate Wealth Report, and I do that intersection of geopolitics and markets that very few people I think do well. So there you go.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so let's jump right in. And guys, if you want to ask questions, you can put them in the chat, or we'll be opening it up for people later. Tom, what do you think is going on in the Middle East with Russia? Because
Uh,
I want to jump right in.
uh, that's a good question, and I'm not sure I have a full and complete answer for anyone at this point because we have a whole lot of unknown unknowns, if you know what I mean. If you want to get like Rumsfeldian about it, I mean, the problem here is that I've heard a lot of different takes on this at this point, and I have some ideas, and I find the most compelling argument at this point is is an amalgam of, well, Assad became disillusioned and disenchanted with continuing laying for Erdogan. The Russians knew that they were in an untenable, so they lured everybody into a trap. I don't believe that at all. I just believe that as things degraded in Syria over time, that eventually, the Russians said, okay, well, if Assad, if you're not going to do the things you need to do to survive, and you're not going to take us up on our offer, well, then of trying to stabilize Syria for you with our help, then you've made your bed. We know what we need to do, which is to effectively pull out of the situation completely and leave the management of an unmanageable Syrian set of borders to somebody else who seems to want it. And apparently, the Turks really want it, and the Israelis wanted the Golan Heights. They got what they wanted. And in the short run here, I have to say, well played, Bibi, but poorly played, Erdogan. And the Russians do what they always do, which is they cede territory and preserve manpower and materiel to fight another day. Hello? Hello?
Sorry, I obviously have a different opinion, and I'm going all the way back to the Cold War, right? Russia has always had a strategy of overstating what their weapons capability is and what they're
Mm-hmm.
capable of doing, especially when it comes to projecting power. Now, I'm not arguing that they don't have nukes. I'm not arguing that they don't have intercontinental ballistic missiles and medium range ballistic missiles. But when you go a step further and you look at the weapons that they export, the the threat that they were going to export S-400s to Iran and Syria, which they claimed they had already done, that they've developed new hypersonic, super duper Satan missiles, and all of that stuff. I have seen absolutely no evidence whatsoever that any of that shit works, that it's capable against Western targets or Western offense, and 90% of what's been going on when you're dealing with Russia, especially in the Middle East, has been a bluff. Which is why, and when I first said it, it's kind of like, well, show me the evidence. When I second said it, and Iran attacked Israel with all of the first missile barrage, and none of them got through, it seemed even more likely. Then it was that they gave Hezbollah over 100,000 medium range to long range precision missiles that could hit anywhere within Israel. And that turned out to be bullshit too. Like they're basically firing nothing better than what they were firing out of Gaza. And they weren't targetable at all. And then they had the third barrage, which was they wound up killing one person when one of the missiles misfired and fell on somebody, which, if you've seen the video, it's fucking hilarious. But at the same time, all of this has been a bluff. Israel sent an entire attack squadron into Iran, basically completely undetected, hit every target they want, and lost nothing. So when Hezbollah basically cried uncle and said it was time to form some level of peace agreement with Israel, or at least a ceasefire, the forces that be in Syria knew that who remember Hezbollah is Assad's only real defense against these rebels. When they realized that Hezbollah was not going to make it through, and if they tried, the Israelis were going to knock them off their heads, they realized that even the army realized that there was nothing that can be done, and they folded like a cheap suit. And I think that Russia has been trying really hard. And don't get me wrong, I don't give much credit to Biden on this whole Russia Ukraine thing because it was always based on a threat of force that was never going to materialize. Right? Like Biden was never going to give advanced missiles to Ukraine. Biden was never going to allow his military aid to be anything more than crap they already had or crap that we wanted to offload. It was always based on a threat of force. But when Russia started flexing and they claimed to have a new hypersonic missile with 10 independently targeted warheads, and I'm not a military genius, and I could tell that was bullshit. They fired that missile into the atmosphere where everything is hypersonic, even a paint chip. And those 10 warheads that, even though they claimed they were dummies, did nothing. And America immediately, right after, I think it was the day of or the day after our election here, they fired an updated Minuteman II that from Kansas can hit anywhere in the world in 30 minutes, and the test was flawless. So I think that all of this blustering has been because when Trump gets into power, he is not going to take this shit for even 10 minutes. There's going to be a peace conference. Putin is going to maintain the parts of Ukraine that he already took. Zelensky is going to keep the rest of Ukraine, and there's going to probably be an agreement to cut sanctions over a period of time, and that NATO will not be joined either. That there will be no application to NATO, and that NATO wouldn't accept it even if there was. And I think Syria was always destined to have this happen the second that Russia turned their back. And there were reports everywhere that Saudi Arabia and the U.S. were making some overtures to Assad, that if he was willing to kick Iran and basically Russia out of Syria, that they would leave him in power, let's say. And supposedly he told he just didn't answer them for a while. And then as his government was falling, he called back and said, "Okay, I'll take the deal," and they said, "Too little, too late."
Well, that doesn't jive with the Syrian army folding completely in the face of a bunch of guys in fucking um, Toyota pickup trucks.
I agree, but
It
remember
doesn't make
that
any
we don't
sense.
know
It
the
also doesn't make any
capabilities.
sense that Assad right now is opening up and is going to be an ophthalmologist in fucking Moscow.
Yeah,
Because
well,
if
that doesn't make any
no,
sense.
well, no, then why is Assad back in Moscow? None of that, like, not all. Some of this does not track. Like, I don't. I can at least acknowledge the argument that the Russians don't have what they say they have, or half of what they say they have, or even 75% of what they say they have. Okay, I can buy that argument. Um, I can also buy the argument that the S-400, which is the S-300 PMU-2,
Right.
so we're still talking ultimately what, 40-year-old technology,
Yeah, but I mean,
30-year-old technology.
they've claimed to have updated
Sure,
a
okay,
couple
they've
times,
claimed they've
but
updated it, blah 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 blah, and we all know that the Israelis have the best F-16s.
The Israelis
with
have
the
the
best
F-35.
with the best avionics packages. We know
No,
this.
they have the F-35. They don't. The F-16 is which is also more advanced. But I'm saying they have the F-35. They don't even need the F-6. The F-16 can beat the
I don't
F-35.
think Russia ever claimed that the S-400 could shoot down the F-35.
No, it definitely couldn't. But
No,
I'm saying that.
so from that perspective, the S-400 is a neutered target, is a neutered asset in Syria, so you don't leave them behind. You don't fire them. You don't even fire them if you're under those circumstances either. So
But what
they
I'm
were
saying
put
is
in.
the two things you said. One, why did the Syrian army fold so quickly? That's
They
easy
were
because they
bribed.
had no that and they were bribed. They had no idea if the Israelis were going to enter the war, which it very much seemed the whole time that they would. And they have no idea whatsoever what the capabilities of the rebels were at that point because their intel system was shot. And
No,
Assad was
I
basically
think
out the
that's an
door.
over. I think that's ignoring what we actually know about what happened in Syria over the last 3 years, which is that Assad had been trying to play everybody against everybody else,
Sure.
and ultimately he let his army fall into disrepair.
Well,
That's what he
tomato,
did.
tomato. What I'm saying is there's army
No,
falling into disrepair,
I think it
ruined his
matters
intelligence
because
capabilities.
I think it matters a lot. Don't get me wrong, Halsey. I'm just pushing back here because I think it's necessary.
Please.
Is because it bears because ultimately when Assad is paying it, here the reports we've heard. If Assad is paying his guys $400 or $40 a month, and the Americans are offering $400 for their fucking AK-47s, like they're gonna take that deal.
Oh,
Like
sure.
every and that's the point. Russia would have put the money into Syria to stabilize the situation and stop this and keep morale up and keep the Syrian army, which had been battle hardened from 3 years worth of battle and wiping out ISIS and forcing back Al Nusra and everything else. If you notice what Lavrov said in the interview with Tucker Carlson, he stressed the agreement over what they had carved out with Turkey in 2019 and 2020 over Idlib, right? I
Right.
was fully
Sure.
expecting that when these guys moved out, when that interview dropped, I'm like, Lavrov made that point, and I'm like, oh, okay, so he's waiting. So now he's basically saying, at least it sounded like he was saying, okay, once Assad gives us the go ahead, we have every right to wipe these guys out because Turkey's violated that ceasefire agreement. Now you're right, this is the
Sure.
Russians. They very much always stick to their agreements, let the other guy break them, and then they punish them for breaking the agreement. That's been their
Sure.
modus operandi for as long as you and I have been studying this thing. For me, that's it goes back to about 2013. I don't know how long it goes back for you. Um,
Since the early 2000s.
okay, so fair, fair. You have even more evidence than, or even more bigger body of data than I do on this. So I think we're in agreement on that. So that's what I was expecting. And then on Friday when they meet in Doha, it's clear that Erdogan is fully betraying the Astana process completely. Assad is like, okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm out. And the Russians go, okay, fine. If this is the series of events we have here, then the flowchart ends with we pull the fuck out. If you don't want to fight, then we're not going to fight. And then they leave.
Well, remember, there was also three events that were tied to that interview that are incredibly significant that got
Hmm.
very overlooked. One, Turkey has always been the canary in the coal mine for NATO. That's why they put the Jupiter missiles there before the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's why they've always armed Turkey with things to push the envelope to see how much Russia will take.
Right.
Secondly, if Turkey invades, which they've been doing to the Kurds for weeks now,
Right.
and they get in any kind of trouble with the Russian army, right, then you have a NATO member who can claim Article 5. Okay, not saying they would.
No, Article 5 cannot come into effect on Syria. On Turkish ground, yes. On Syrian
Yeah,
ground, where this
while I agree,
where Turkey is the aggressor into Syria, no.
but remember, the Brits and the French are already chomping at the bit to go after Russia. You don't think
Agreed.
that they would
So
overlook it and
no,
and say
no.
no, that's an Article 5?
Well, what they'll say is the Brits and the French would try and get involved in that, but they would still look to the Pentagon and go, "Are we going?" And the Pentagon would be like, "Go fuck yourself." That's been very clear that the Pentagon's been like, "We're not having a fight between the Russians and Americans in Syria." They've had the deconfliction line open for 10 years now. since the day
Right.
the Russians moved in. As a matter of fact, I've spoken to both Alex Craner and Larry Johnson about this, and they both confirmed the same thing, which is that we're the ones who gave Russia all the friggin' information as to where ISIS was, because the commanders on
Sure.
the ground in the American commanders on the ground in 2015 were being told not to fire on these guys. So they backdoored the information to the Russians when the Russians moved in October, and that's why they wiped everything out so damn quickly. So the American commanders, the military, the guys on the ground wanted to take out ISIS in 2015, and they weren't allowed. So we outsourced
Oh, I
that to
know.
the Russians when they moved in. So any idea that a conflict between the Kurds and Iraq over, in getting involved with Turkey would trigger an Article 5 from the perspective of the Pentagon is that's nonsense. From
But I mean, the
Westminster
American press is already
from
reporting.
Westminster and Paris, absolutely. But from the Pentagon's perspective, they're like, "That's fun, you frogs and you fucking limeys. You have fun."
I hear you, but what I'm saying is also the American press is starting to say that we traded Syria for Ukraine to the
Right.
Russians,
And
and that's obvious in what they did at Latakia when they took out the entire Syrian navy. Russia
so,
basically made the deal that they're going to keep the area on the Black Sea in Ukraine, and they're not going to need a Syrian port because that
yeah.
would have changed everything.
Well, okay. Yeah, well, that's the thing. So one of the things I was saying earlier in the week, I was coming to that down to, if you really think about the situation as it was 3 weeks ago, Russia was making the
Hmm.
gambit for taking all the valuable land in Ukraine that isn't the wheat fields,
Hmm.
minus Odessa, um, Crimea, and the port of Tartus, and a port south of the Dardanelles.
Well, yeah, but you
The
would expect
Americans
that
were
because
the Americans
they
were
know
never
they're
going to give.
entering in negotiations
Well,
with Trump.
the Americans were never going to allow the Russians to keep all three. It was going
No,
to, at best, pick two, right? Under any circumstance, that was never going to happen. Not under Biden, not under Trump, not under anybody. And that's fair, to be honest with you, from the Americans' point of view. So now, whether or not the Russians get to keep the base of Tartus, doubtful. It'll be negotiated away, and it'll probably be negotiated away for any territory the Ukrainians still have in Russia. But I have a distinct feeling that Putin's just now going to actually put fucking troops on the ground and wipe these guys out, as opposed to playing the games that he's been playing. Um, and and he's going to keep Crimea, and he's going to keep the territory he has. He might even wind up with more territory than he's currently taken. In the end, I don't think the war in Ukraine is done. I
it's
don't.
not done. It's winding down.
Well, maybe. Again, this is up. This is not up to you. It should be up to the Russians and the Americans, right? And I I do believe that Putin is ready to negotiate a reasonable fucking deal. The problem is that the British and the French are not, and to a lesser extent the German Greens, who are really just the British all over again, um, are absolutely not down with this. They need a war to cover their default,
Oh, I know
and
that. I mean,
and
I think that's a given at this point.
well, yeah, I know, and that's the problem. So Putin and Trump both are literally trying to limp across the finish line until Trump is inaugurated on the 21st of January, and we still have 5 weeks for these people to go fucking hog wild. So now my bigger question, my bigger problem is, what do we, what comes? Say, when I look at Syria the way it is right now, I can see a peace agreement coming out of this, or more appropriately, what I can see is the following. Imagine, you know, dealing with Ukraine, dealing with Syria this way. Oh, by the way, the neocons are now talking about, trying to overthrow Lukashenko again in Belarus, by the way.
I know, but that's neither here nor there. I don't think.
Okay, so
But
now let's take a whole slice of the world, starting at Finland and going south all the way to the Gulf of Aden. Like, and it's
mhm.
that strip that is eastern Ukraine, you know, all of that, Crimea, all the way down to Syria. If the Russians and the Americans both pull out of that entire strip west of the Donbass, all the way south, and that's like basically the DMZ, right? Then it puts a cap on Israel's ambitions. It puts a cap on Turkey's ambitions. It actually it actually does exactly what Trump tweeted out on Saturday, which is Syria's not our friend. It's not our fight. It's not our problem. Let them sort it out amongst themselves, which means ultimately, hey, you want fucking Damascus that bad because you think it's the precursor for the Great War and the coming of the Messiah and all this other eschatological bullshit? Have fun. You govern that shit because we're not doing
Well,
it. We
Israel
have
has
like
no desire
900. We
for
have
it.
like 900 guys left in Syria, for Christ's sake.
We have for a while. It's not about our presence there. Our presence is not. Our presence is more of a placeholder, which gives us an excuse if we want to go in. But we haven't been projecting true power in a foreign war since Vietnam. So you know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
our power is projected from the sea and projected from our airplanes and things like that. Our troops that we put on the ground in those places are there to serve as makeshift police. Is the best way to put
And potential tripwires.
it. Right. Because they can always say there was an attack on this base or there was an
Right,
attack
right,
on
right.
that base and send
And
in the
so,
heavy artillery.
but the big thing, the big potential here is that once this like ant pile has been finished being stirred up, like at the end of the day, like what we're dealing with finally is the resolution of Sykes-Picot going back to 1913.
Well, if that were the case, if that were to happen, then you're going to see them putting like statues of Trump all over the world. Not that I'm disagreeing with you per se. I don't think it's that explicit, but I think
No, I
that
know. I'm
the
just saying that's the outcome. What I'm
but what
saying
I'm
is the
saying is that in the Middle East we've had an issue for since Sykes-Picot where Arab leaders and now even a lot of non-Western leaders use the causes of Iran and Syria and the Palestinians and all of
insane.
them to stir up local populations,
Right.
right? Or to placate enemies, things like that. But it's come back to bite every single one that's tried to do it. And you've
Hmm.
seen more and more countries just say this is enough. It's getting too stupid. And I
Yes.
don't think anyone anticipated Israel's action after October 7th. So I don't think anyone expected the pure destruction that they were going to rain on Lebanon and Gaza.
Hmm.
So I think right now the linchpin of what stops this whole area from moving forward, whether it be under Russian or American guidance, let's not say, control, but let's say guidance,
Guidance. Yeah. Sure.
that the whole thing that stops it is Iran, and Iran is a weak state. And Russia, if sanctions are lifted, Iran is a competitor. And
Right.
China wants just a direction to get to the Road and Belt Initiative in Africa.
Well,
So,
yeah, and that is also something that this is okay. So now you bring up a very important point here, which is the following. You just brought up Africa. So now let's really talk about what happens here. So let's start with let's start with some of the basics. Syria is not a real country any more than Ukraine is a real country in its current political borders. It was crafted out of whole cloth by the British in order to allow them, whenever they wanted to send some fucking guy from MI6 in there with a 500-pound note strapped to his ass to start a war.
sure.
Right? That's the British. That's the British thing, and they taught it to us, and we do it. I don't know as well as we do it in different. We do some things very well. Like this, if this was an American operation and getting the Syrian army to stand down, we're good at this particular type of operation. The British are not.
Sure.
The British are good at blowing up bridges and blaming it on other people, poisoning a whole bunch of people and blaming it on people and blaming it on their enemies and all this kind of happy horse shit, right? Um, bribing businessmen to take short positions against companies that like that's the British way. They're very feminine about this shit, to be honest with you. They use reputational attack and underhanded bullshit. They're very good at it.
I
Um,
know.
right. I'm talking to the audience here. I'm not really talking to you because I know you know
Okay.
that. So break up. So look at Syria. Understand that as a country, it was always designed to be a tripwire for whatever in case peace ever broke out. It threatened to break out. This is not the British way because then wherever peace breaks out, they lose influence. Okay,
Right,
because
which is why Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon were created in the first place.
Right.
They're
Exactly.
all three countries are distinctly divided
Right.
between people that hate each other, and
Right.
we'll get into it. But go keep
Right.
going.
But so resolving Syria as a thing, and removing and watching the whole region reorganize itself politically, meaning new political borders are actually drawn, right? Where we have a rump Syria that's rolled by, I don't know, Alawites or whoever wants, whether the Christians all move back into Lebanon or what. I don't know. I don't know the region well enough to know who's going to wind up where. I just know that the Kurds, we could wind up with Kurdistan. It's going to destabilize the shit out of Western Turkey, which is, oh, by the way, Erdogan understood this, which is why he started making political overtures within Turkey to the PKK and the YPG about 6 months ago.
Sure,
I don't know if you noticed that or not.
sure, of course,
But you and I haven't spoken on these topics in a while, so I have to make sure I bring them all up to make sure that we're on the same page. Um,
sure.
so you wind up balkanizing Syria. Now all of a sudden, um, you create a buffer zone between Iran and Israel. Now that Israel's happy because Iran has no longer got its proxies on surrounding it, and stirring up bullshit on Israel's borders. And for the anti-Israelis in the audience, oh well, take the loss, Susan. I don't know what else to tell you.
Hmm.
But the Iranians actually get what the Iranian people actually get what they want, because now they've got a reformist um, as president. No, Raisi's death. It was interesting. I was just doing another show, um, and this got brought up, and the no one questioned whether Raisi was assassinated. The question you should ask is, who assassinated him? Was it an inside job inside Iran? Everybody assumed it was, Israel. But what if it was actually, opposition forces to Khamenei inside,
I've never thought it was Israel. So
I know.
you're
Okay,
speaking
that's
my
fine.
language now.
Yeah, so I'm just throwing this out there. I don't know one way or the other. It could have been us. It could have been the British. My first thought is, because I fucking hate the Limeys, that it was the British, right? Stirring up shit as always. But this actually makes a lot more sense, because in the end of the day, if the Iranian, the quote unquote mullahs, another fucking phrase I can't stand, are quote unquote overthrown, or at least neutralized, and Iran becomes a rational state because they no longer have their cause célèbre anymore. Um, and the Israelis have no reason to really fear Iran anymore, because there's a nice big buffer state between them now. They have the Golan Heights, so they've secured energy. But then you have to start thinking about everybody else. Who else is going to get the buy-in in order to allow this to happen? So let's now go back to the whole pipeline angle on this. The British actually get something out of this that they didn't get before, which is they get a fucking pipeline from Qatar, because Qatar is their fucking
Sure.
proxies. So the British actually get some cash flow off of a pipeline from Qatar into southern Europe. The Europeans get that pipeline plus one other. Turkey gets the gas transit fees. The Russians are actually happy now because they're this is the interesting part about it. We can't analyze the situation from 2015 as if it's 2015 when this whole thing started. So why did Russia move into Syria in the first place? It's because they didn't have relationships with the rest east that were solidified to the point where they had revenue streams that would replace the gas that was going to Europe. And Europe was
Hmm.
clearly telling them they no longer wanted to buy gas from the Russians at a price the Russians were willing to sell to them for, right? So that's why they changed the rules and forced Putin to scuttle South Stream and repurpose it as Turk Stream, which then empowers Erdogan to think he can become the Sultan. And like, this is where we are. So everybody has to get a buy-in here. France has to get something. And what does France get out of this? Well, France gets that the Russians have been pushed out of Syria to help stop the goddamn Chinese from going into Africa any further into Africa. Now there's a break in the chain. And so this is again, you know, when uh, when the BRICS added this, I think the catalyst for all of this, by the way, is when the BRICS added 7 countries last year to the alliance that all ring and all control the choke points for the maritime sea lanes around the Middle East. And then what a shock! 2 months later, you and I said this back in October. We were talking privately about this. that what a shock. 2 months later, Hamas goes hog wild and attacks Israel. Like, obviously, something needed to be accelerated, because no way were the British going to stand by and lose control of all of the maritime sea routes, which are the linchpin to what's left of their GDP, which is literally shipping insurance and forex exchange in the city of London. It's
Okay,
30% of
well,
British GDP.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm
So
just what I'm a
so
little shocked about though is that there's a couple dots that you haven't put together. Now,
okay.
look, I'm not claiming that Joe Biden is even sentient anymore, let
No, he's
alone
not.
a master tactician.
No, he's not.
But what would be the goal of all of this if they could break up the mess that was put down by Sykes-Picot? It would be to realign the populations that generally agree with each other, that don't generally have a problem with people outside their borders, unless it's lip service,
Right.
and that could guarantee basically everything. So the first linchpin was Iraq, right? Iraq has
Hmm.
three populations: Kurd, Shia, and Sunni.
Hmm.
And if you look at where they're located, it's even more obvious
Right.
because the Shia are all on the east coast. I mean, on
Hmm.
the east side of the country. The Kurds are in the
Yep.
north and the
Herbal.
Sunnis are everywhere else.
Right.
Right
Hmm.
now, when we went into Iraq, there was one senator, one, who suggested that the idea that Iraq remain one country was completely ridiculous and that it would lead to exactly what happened in Iraq
Yep.
if they weren't broken into three countries. He was laughed out of the room, by the way. And do you know who that was?
John McCain.
Joe Biden. He was laughed out of the room. Every single military analyst on TV at the time
Oh, I'm
said he
sorry.
was nuts.
The one senator who made this argument was Joe Biden. I'm sorry. I thought it
Yes.
was the one guy. The guy who laughed at him had to have been John McCain. That's what
No,
I meant.
no,
Yeah.
I'm sure. No, everybody laughed at him.
Oh, okay.
But what I'm saying is that with the fall of Hamas and Hezbollah, which are now neutered, like
Right.
they can still
Right.
cause problems, but they've got way
Right.
more big things that they have to worry about.
Right.
With the fall of Syria, right?
Hmm.
And with the very likelihood that Iran is not going to be maintaining a power source, they've been proven to have nothing.
Hmm.
Okay, their whole goal was that they were just trying to distract everyone long enough that they could develop a nuclear bomb, and it's not happening. Okay, and I promise you that if the Americans or the Israelis get any hint that they're even close, regardless of what the press tell you, they will bomb Iran into the Stone Age. Okay, but what you've got right now is a realignment that is geographically perfect. You have the Kurds that are united in northern Syria and Iraq. You have the Sunnis, which are directly contiguous between Iraq and Syria, and you have
Hmm.
the Shia, which are all directly contiguous with Iran.
Hmm.
This is like the dream scenario, and it goes back to what you've always said about Jerome Powell going to war with Europe, and that our economies have been at war with Europe, and Trump is the tiger in the room. He wants us to break with Europe. He's tired
Yeah.
of NATO dominance causing all these bullshit wars all over the world, and then
Right.
we have to come pay for it and mop it up.
Hmm.
And when they say that they're sacrificing Ukraine, I mean, this is just so obvious. It's sick. All Russia needs is a Mediterranean port, or a port that has access to the Mediterranean where they can ship their goods and get out to where they need to, no problem. All China needs is to be able to get directly is to revive the old Silk Road and be able to get to Africa, which, trust me, no one gives a shit about other than China. Okay? All of that happens with three continuous areas, even if they remain separate countries.
Hmm.
Everyone knows that Iran is the major player in all of the Shia areas of Iraq. They have
Every,
the Iraqi government.
and Iran is the key to understanding Asian trade, which is that it's the
Right,
crossroads of both the international north-south transport corridor and the Silk Road,
right,
or the BRI, and
right.
that's Iran's gib. Now the problem here is France,
Yeah, they're a bit of a problem, but not
because
much.
France doesn't want to give up Central Africa. And so now the question, again, earlier this evening I was asked the question, so why was Trump's first appearance on the world stage after the election, he goes to France. What to tell Macron? Oh, by the way, fuck off. I controlled. If you tell your Rothschild masters, I own your ass, because that's what his body language told me.
Not to mention the fact that didn't France's government fall like 5 minutes later?
Well, no, it had already fallen.
Right, but
The no confidence vote
but I
happened the
mean,
day before. Yes,
right. But
but
what I'm saying though is that right
Macron
now,
refuses to leave. But Macron refuses to leave power because constitutionally he doesn't. France is headed to a constitutional crisis.
oh, I know.
Right.
France is headed towards a constitutional crisis, and Britain and France are both being held out to dry really, really badly, I might add,
I
because
agree.
their economies are not prepared to handle this kind of hit. Their energy resources are nil, if not unavailable at all. Which,
Hmm.
by the way, when the whole drill baby drill thing comes on, when the fact that Saudi Arabia is now willing to accept foreign currency for oil, when
Hmm.
Iran is, as I said, they're dead, and if sanctions even close to get lifted on Russia, then they're pacified, but they're controlled.
Yeah,
Without without
because
foreign.
Iran, because at that point Iran ultimately really becomes a Russian client state, because the Russians are the only ones who have the Russians and the Iranians now have full interoperable trade along in their own private, in their own, basically their own version of Swift. Like
Well,
they
remember
just
also,
they
everybody thinks history started 5 years ago.
right.
People forget
Yes,
that in 1978, Israel and America's greatest ally in the whole entire world was Iran.
I know, I know.
So the Islamic Republic falls. The Shia don't have necessarily a big problem with Israel or the USA,
Right.
nor do they want to live in a theocracy. Like that's actually like something that they've been holding together with twine, is
Hmm.
this idea of a theocracy in Iran. And if Trump comes in and says, okay, we're not having any more wars, we're not doing this anymore.
Right.
Like, if you want to keep going towards either nuclear weapons or you want to keep exporting terror all over the Middle East, we'll just bomb the fuck out of you. And we'll let the Israelis do it too. And not only will you die, but you'll die humiliated, you know? And China seems on board. They've established a BRICS coin to start floating some ideas of foreign currencies, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but whatever. And Trump obviously is not going to let it happen.
Well,
But
what's going to happen here is with the whole BRICS thing, is that's a classic a defensive position against the hyper weaponization of the U.S. dollar. Like
sure,
it's simply put, all we have to do is stop weaponizing the fucking dollar. All Trump has to do is stop using the Magnitsky style sanctions, which is a very British thing, by the way. It was created by Bill Browder as a fucking MI6 asset.
I
Um,
agree. But what's even better is when you actually examine the numbers, right? Remember, we talked about this
mm,
also back in October because I spent 4 days poring over this because I was so bothered by it because
mm,
it made no sense to me. In that, when you hear about Biden giving 50 billion to Ukraine, right?
right,
He's not writing a check. There's no check that's being delivered to a Ukrainian bank and then he can go spend it on whatever he wants.
right,
He's basically offloading our old crap that we don't want,
right.
or buying it off of the Eastern Europeans and giving it to Ukraine. It's basically worthless stuff. Yes, it can keep the Russians focused on defending and things like that, but it's not going to win a war, that's for sure.
No,
But when Biden tries to fuck things up by saying, "Oh, we're going to give 20 billion from the seized Russian assets to Ukraine," if Trump decided to come in tomorrow and say, "I want a peace agreement," everybody start playing nice, and they all agree, he can give them $20 billion that was earmarked for Ukraine in the first place. Just by, instead of giving them our old military crap, he could just give Russia their money back, which would signal to all world markets.
that's going to be a very interesting part of this. The Europeans are going to demand, because they're a bunch of hyper corrupt um, fuckwits who promised to their investors in Project Ukraine and the war against Russia. They promised the trillions of dollars worth of assets controlled by the Donbass in Russia, and they can't cash that check. I think a lot of the money that you're constantly seeing, like money being earmarked and flown over to Ukraine. I think there's a lot of the money that has been um, uh, uh, approved in the last since the election. All of that is about envelope day.
Yeah, but most of that, if you read into the numbers, they publish what the money goes to. The majority of it goes to pay us back for what we've already given them.
I know that. I understand. Halsey, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about these little tranches of 800 million here, a billion there, 2
Yeah,
billion there.
no, those are bribes.
This is all money that has to flow into Ukraine to satisfy um, debt arrangements, to pay coupon payments to bondholders that have already been for the money that was already spent. That the real money that was spent keeping Ukraine alive. There is a significant it's Ukraine is your 21-year-old going to college that you're still paying for everything while they go to college.
Yep.
That's what Ukraine is. And that bill is something like 15-18 billion dollars a year. Okay. And this is why the Europeans are so desperate to funnel the money in, because that money plus the coupon payments on the debt that's already been issued has to be satisfied, or the Bank of England goes bankrupt, as Alex Grainer's pointed out, or and there's all sorts of other agreements that we don't know anything about. But the way these people are frantically trying to figure out how to seize the money that they froze of Russia's 300 billion in foreign exchange reserves and throw it back into Ukraine, aside from the fact that they just want to steal the money from themselves, which is a motivation. It's also about making sure that they don't get lynched um, by stiffing other mob bosses. Like this is when you start thinking about all of this in terms of like different mob families, right? It all makes a lot more sense. Replace France with with Don Franco, and the British with Don Limeo, and the Germans with Don Shit Eater O, and all of a sudden you understand this a lot better, right? This all makes more sense that way, and that's what we're seeing right now. Is that there's a palpable, like like palpable fucking terror, and the way the capital markets are trading, it's so clearly obvious that everybody's holding on by the skin of their fucking teeth, holding out hope that they somehow figure out a way to keep Trump from coming to power, because he's gonna put a stop to all this shit. And
Sure.
and once it happens, they have no recourse but to let the whole thing collapse. And if they don't force Putin into a fucking kinetic conflict with them, so that they can recast him as Hitler, um, and then blame their problems on him, and then justify you know they just need any excuse to justify stealing the money. So, and the Europeans have been forced, and Biden's actually played this really well. Actually, I'm going to give Joe some credit here, because the the Europeans kept trying all this year and in part of last year to get us to go first, to seize the Russian money first, right?
Hmm.
They control like 210 billion of the 300 that was frozen. We only control like 20 or 30 billion of it. It's not very much money. It may be as much as 40. Like, and so when you stop to think about the potential consequences of what to the American to America's prestige, to its ability to do business overseas and everything else, for stealing $40 billion and handing it to the Ukrainians, would cost us tens of trillions of dollars in future revenue, which is why the Europeans were trying to get us to go first, and then they were never going to. And if we went first, they were never going to go. Now that they're desperate for the money, now that they're running out of other people's money, now that the Eurodollar markets are seizing up, now they're like, oh shit, we fucking need that money now. And it doesn't matter how we get it. And and this is the way they're acting. And it's very obvious to me. And
Hmm.
so again, if we never do that, if we actually then turn around, we're gonna unfreeze that money, Putin, and what are you gonna give us in return? There we go. What the Europeans are going to argue is that the money that they've frozen should be paid as reparations to rebuild Ukraine for all the damage that the Russians have done to it in the war. And the Russians are going to say no. And that's going to be a very interesting moment in the negotiations because the Russians are going to say, no, fuck you. We told you what our red lines were. You crossed those red lines and then you seized our fucking money. So you're going, and this is a very typical European. Where they take your shit and then they offer it back to you as and say, well, we gave you something back. No, you stole my shit, and now you want to use my shit to um to to force an agreement? Like, go fuck yourself. Like, you owe us $210 billion plus another $210 billion for seizing our money. Like, the Russians are very libertarian about this in that respect.
Oh, I
You know,
know.
very libertarian justice theory. I want an eye for two eyes and a little bit of scaring. And the Europeans are like, oh no, we're going to steal your money and then we're going to give it back to you, but we want concessions before we give it back. How about you go fuck yourself and we'll call it even? And we'll wipe out even more of your. Why don't you send more? Why don't you send more shitty tanks into to give to the Ukrainians so we can blow them up? Because our guys need more target practice. That's the way the Russians are playing this war. It's very obvious. Like, it's
Well,
so
what's
obvious to them.
even more interesting is that the Chinese and the Russians, without BRICS, have already established a method in which Russia can get its money back without
Mhm.
without America or anyone losing faith except for some of the European countries. And do you know how that was?
How is?
China floated a $2 billion bond in Saudi
Yes.
Arabia,
Yes.
and they offered basically 2 billion, and it got sopped up immediately, which allows China to borrow at the same rate that the U.S. government can.
Yes.
Russia can do the exact same thing
Yes.
because no one has a problem giving their money that we give Russia's money to Saudi Arabia for oil or for goods or for whatever it may be.
Right.
Or Russia can just get its money passed through China, who never took part in the Russian bank sanctions.
Right.
So you're looking at a way for them to get their money back and a rock solid commitment, because there's now this alternative,
Hmm.
that nobody has to worry about the weaponization of the dollar because there's out methods regardless of whether we weaponize the dollar or not.
Hmm.
So
And that's what
China established
and
this.
yeah, and actually, and this brings up now let's talk about the next point, which is the Chinese also floated a whole bunch of dollar denominated loans to their major trading partners, which are the Asian Tiger Five, not us,
Sure.
because they're the people who feed and clothe the Chinese people, by the way. They're far more important than the people who sell who sell who buy the reassembled American goods that were manufactured in America, assembled in China, and then sent back for for Americans to buy. Oh, by the way, um, like, it's so funny. Like, just the whole thing is just hilarious. Like, Apple makes all their parts in America, and then they ship them to China for assembly, and then ship them back to the United States. It's fucking hilarious.
And funny
And
enough, it's financially feasible to do that.
no, under globalism and under zero bound interest rates, it has been, it's not going to be going forward. That's going to end. But that's neither here nor there. What's important is that these bonds were really important because that was actually a fig leaf from China to the Americans, saying, look, we're going to mobilize our dollar reserves in such a way that we stabilize our partners, which will allow you to pull back on global dollar liquidity, so that you're not overexposed to this massive eurodollar system, which is actually hollowing out your domestic economy. Okay. Which is what Powell and the banks have been. This was my argument about Powell and the banks, why they did what they did with SOFR and all the rest of it. What I'm saying is the Chinese mobilized that debt. Those dollar denominated bonds are repayable in yuan. So you have
Yep.
the yuan. So as the dollar pulls back, the yuan slides forward, which it naturally should anyway in that region of the world. It should
Well,
not.
you also have a scenario where the Chinese now don't have to worry about American sentiment about repatriating dollars into this country. The Chinese have
Exactly.
run out of shit to spend money on in America because
Well,
they tried buying all the farmland and everybody just made it illegal. And
right.
you could pass a law making it more illegal, and
Right.
China would be fine with it because they can repatriate their dollars to Saudi Arabia, and then they can
Right.
be paid back in yuan.
And those dollars that are being sent into Thailand or Saudi Arabia or Singapore or whatever, those dollars are going to be extinguished because they're just there to service existing dollar denominated debt. So when that debt is paid off, those dollars are never going to come home. They're going to be extinguished. That's the
Yeah,
big
for
one.
sure.
That's the key, and that then takes a big chunk out of the potential quote unquote hyperinflation when everybody repudiates the dollar. Like, no, the whole world is actually trying to figure out a way to deal with the dollar pulling back. And I know it's funny, you and I haven't like talked publicly or even all that often about this stuff, but I've been making this point for 3 years, and people have literally told me I'm fucking crazy, and I'm like, dude, it's happening. What the fuck are you talking about? Like, but
Well, that's
whatever.
always I got in this argument today on the Morning Constitutional, is
Mhm.
that when you bring these things up, people always just say, "Well, where's your evidence?" The evidence is it's happening.
Right. The
I could
evidence is
produce
that China
documents,
just floated like $30 billion worth of friggin' bonds to the Asian Tiger Five to repayable in yuan. Fuck a whole lot of you.
right? And what I'm saying is that the only currency that is being looked at as generally worthless right now is the euro.
Yeah, because the euro is
You know,
worthless.
but
Because
it
it
always
can't pay, because
was,
it can't buy Russian oil and gas, because the Russians told them fuck you gold or rubles,
right?
right? Um, you can't export them around the world. Dude, I hit this last year. Like, so when I used to work with the guy in Southeast Asia, Peter Pham, back in 2011, 2012, 2013. Swift started a thing they called the RMB tracker. It's a
Sure.
monthly report of the internationalization of the Chinese RMB.
Hmm.
And I've been subscribed to that thing since 2012. I don't know. And so I get the reports every once in a while, and every once in a while I remind myself to just go look at it. I used to get them dropped into my email box every month, but now I don't get them anymore. It's fine, whatever. But about I don't know, about a year ago, I went and I looked at the numbers. I just, oh, let's just check to see what's going on. And what I noted was very, very, and I've written about this. Prior to the war in Russia, between Russia and Ukraine breaking out, so in February or January of 2022, um, the euro's percentage of Swift. This is only Swift. This is not. This is only falling through the Swift system. The percentage of foreign trade outside of the eurozone settled in, and then the percentages of the breakdown. The dollar was at 58 or 59%. The euro was at like 33%. And then there was everybody else. Okay.
Hmm.
A year later, after Russia tells the tells the Europeans, oh fuck a whole lot of you, rubles or gold, the euro collapses from 35% to 13%. So while everybody's talking about the collapse of the petrodollar system, what you really have to understand is that the European Union has been running this game of and telling everybody how inevitable they are and how the euro is this great fucking currency and how they're going to take over everything and we're a powerful trading bloc and you have to normalize all of your internal capital handling rules to match our demands as your trade partners, which is what they do. It's really what they were doing that through a petro euro. The Russians were selling them so much fucking oil that it was obviously settling a tremendous amount of euro, and it was forcing the euro into foreign exchange reserves on foreign central banks all over the world through
Agreed.
their massive oil trade, their massive energy trade with the Russians. And the minute the
Agreed.
Russians cut them off, we found out what the euro was worth on the open market outside of the energy trade. So they were trying to establish the euro reserve system through a petro euro, using Russia as the client state, the same way we use the Saudi Arabians.
Sure.
And then when they
But
betrayed the Russians said, "Fuck a whole lot of you. We don't need you."
agreed 100%. But you're leaving out a very important point,
Sure, which
that
is,
when you see that the bitter reaction of Trump towards the idea of a BRICS currency, right?
hmm
The anger isn't towards BRICS. BRICS is not going to be a competitor for the dollar for a long time, if it ever
Well, of
becomes
course,
one at all.
of course,
Okay, everyone knows that because you're dealing with a bunch of countries whose currencies are completely inherently unstable to begin with.
right?
But Europe has already tried this, and they did it
Yes,
in a way where every single time we tried to punch back against the euro, they would just start another fucking war, knowing that
yes,
we were going to have to pay for it and print the money to give back to them to fight the war that they're not willing to fight, that we now have to fight. Those days are over. It doesn't exist anymore, which is why they keep trying to push America and Ukraine into a full out boots on the ground war with Russia,
right.
because they realize that the power of the euro doesn't exist anymore. And the other countries that realize that they've been taken for a ride by the Europeans as well, by the European central banks and all of that, all
Mhm.
of those people have now reacted to the fact that they don't care how bad we print money. They never have, they never will.
Right.
If everyone who loves to get on and yap about it and go, oh no, we printed so much money that it's worthless paper now, and there's going to be
Mhm.
hyperinflation and all this stuff. Have you noticed that one threat of tariffs got fucking China to go, oh no, we'll do whatever you want. Let's get to the table.
Right.
Mexico and China and Canada too. Mexico said, you want to stop illegal immigration? Done. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yeah.
Nobody is afraid to take dollars right now. And even though every financial indicator is they should be afraid to take dollars. And the
Yeah.
reason
No,
being is because Trump has indicated and the American people are all for it, and the financial markets have been preparing for it for years, that the euro is meaningless and worthless. It's
yes.
not backed by anything. It's not
Yep.
backed by economies that are sustainable. It's
Yep.
not backed by economies that are defendable.
Yep.
All that it's backed by is the fact that America has a boner for Europe that it can't get rid of and hasn't been able to since the Revolutionary War. They've sucked us into one world war. They've sucked us into two world wars. They sucked us into Korea. They sucked us into Vietnam. They
Yep.
sucked us into the Cold War. They sucked us into all of this shit, and now it's stopping.
Guess
Now, I'm
what?
not
And it
predicting the
all comes
absolute collapse of Europe.
and it
I'm
all
predicting
comes
the
back
absolute
to
collapse of their currency.
it all comes back to Trump getting into power in 2016, nominating, being handed Jerome Powell's name as Federal Reserve Chair, who immediately greenlights SOFR once he puts John Williams in charge of the New York Fed, which the entire European fucking economic intelligentsia screamed bloody murder. He is not qualified. How can you put this man in charge of the New York Fed? He is a fucking bumpkin from Atlanta. Blah, 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 blah. You know what he also was? The architect of SOFR.
I know.
And,
Which is basically
uh,
why I asked for this space with you, by the way, today, because I
right,
wanted to tell you that I've literally been analyzing this for months now since we talked back in October.
right,
You're right about Jerome Powell. Like I may have disagreed with you at the time,
right.
but you're absolutely right about him. And I'm not talking about this as an attack. They're not going after the Europeans.
No.
They're
Well,
just letting the Europeans stand on their own 2 feet.
yep.
They're not going to let the US economy get sucked into endless climate agreements, endless NATO agreements, endless wars all over the world to satisfy a European debt machine that can't stop gobbling money.
Yeah,
Okay. And that has
exactly.
absolutely no real way to pay it back.
And the point, and because the United States, since the Revolutionary War, since the day after Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown, has never had independent monetary policy. All leading up to the world to the recent unpleasantness. I mean, Lincoln's War of Aggression. I mean, the Civil War. We ran a massive trade deficit with Europe, and that determined our monetary policy. It determined our fiscal policy. It determined our foreign policy. And as we were closing the trade gap with Europe up north by industrializing up north, they saw the writing on the wall, and that's why Britain and France both went out of their way to stoke Southern secession and stoke the fucking Civil War, and they had agreements in place. You read the Richard Poe book,
Of
right?
course. But you know
And
what? You know that they also promised the South that they would support them. They
yes,
promised the South that they would issue war bonds for the Southern currency that would
mhm.
actually have changed the entire path of it. And then all of a sudden, they stepped back and said, no, they can't. And why? For the same bullshit that we do now, they made the war about racism.
Well, and
They didn't make
moreover,
it about
well,
trade
and
policy.
and because the czar stepped in and blockaded the fucking ports and
Of course.
wouldn't allow them to reinforce the reinforce and blockade the union. And so by doing that, it literally, they're still pissed off that Lincoln survived, and they're still angry about it. And that's why they have such a fucking hard on to kill the Russians, for many other reasons as well. But that's a big one. And so, and then after that, go. You know, when Richard put that idea in my head the last time I had him on the podcast, um, and I think it's episode 171 of the Gold Ghosts and Guns podcast. The last time, it was the second time Richard Poe was on, and he was talking about the trade deficit stuff. When you look, I went ahead and I ran over to the Federal Reserve, and the Fed's actually got a Fred graph. The St. Louis Fed has a Fred graph of the trade balance between Europe and the United States, going all the way back to the Revolutionary War. And it's clear there are three eras. There's the massive trade deficit up until the Civil War. And then after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, we start running a trade surplus with Europe, which ends with the end of World War II and Bretton Woods and the Marshall Plan, where we start running a trade deficit again, where we start rebuilding Europe by sending our money out to Europe to rebuild. And we allow them, as Howard Lutnick has pointed out, we allowed massive tariffs to be put on every industry where we competed directly with nascent European industries to allow them to rebuild, because we were so much more efficient than them. So we left, we put on 100%, we allowed Germany to put 100% tariffs on cars and this and that and everything else in order to help them rebuild. But those tariffs are still in place. The Europeans are pissed off about tariffs. They forget the fact that there's still a massive tariff on American cars entering Germany. Okay,
Sure.
aside from the fact, and what it's and so that those three eras are very clear that we're still in a trade deficit with Europe, and that's why Europe thinks that it can wag the dog and make us do what we need them to do, what they want us to do. They've also infiltrated our fucking government to the highest level. They've infiltrated the British neocons and the Trotskyites and the old British communists have infiltrated the State Department and the CIA. Blah 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 blah. We've been hollowed out from within by a bunch of fucking European shitbag Eurotrash commies that have been using our seed corn to, to keep them alive and run their fucking warfare welfare state. Fuck them. I'm done with it. I don't give a shit anymore. I'm over it. You
There's
want,
also
as
a
you
lot
said,
more significant events that people never seem to connect, like to this whole thing as well. And you know what those two things majorly are? One, the bombing of the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline, and number
hmm
two was the oopsie doopsie Chinese anchor that severed the fiber optic cables between Finland and Estonia.
right.
Okay,
You think that was
they don't
Chinese? I
want
think that was
those
I think that was the
things.
Russians, by the way.
I don't think it was the Russians. I think it was a combination of the Russians and some of our allies, to tell you the
Oh,
truth.
okay.
I think we were involved. But
We were involved.
right
That's interesting.
now, what we're not going to allow to happen, and I said this to you years ago,
Mm,
before this Russian Ukraine thing even started. I said they're never going to allow Europe to be the world's oil station, gas station.
hmm
They're never going to allow these pipelines to become the lifeblood of the East, right? Of getting
hmm
Russian and Ukrainian oil into Europe, and then Europe being the guy who says, well, we'll ship you this much or that much or this much. Because Europe, in their climate madness, has denuclearized. I know I didn't say that right, but they've done everything they can to get rid of oil and to go back to coal and natural
Right.
gas. There's no way that they were going to allow them to be the lifeline of the oil and natural gas pipelines, that at any point they could go, well, we just need it for ourselves. Sorry. Because no one can offer a military solution against Europe without invoking America's wrath. And I've always said this too. Everyone loves to say that it was the petrodollar that keeps the dollar as the world's reserve currency. No, it's because our fucking military is literally placed everywhere in the world to
Yes.
ensure every shipping route that ever needed to be enforced. And all we needed to do, all of it, was we needed to prove that American military dominance was still just as focused and just as able as anyone else.
Yep.
And I'll tell you this, they proved it hands down. And now you
Yeah.
have Europe doesn't have the gas, they don't have the oil, they don't have the nuclear. They are saddled with debt that we've been paying for God knows how long because we being America, pay their military.
Hmm.
We pay the commitments they make to other countries. We pay, and I didn't really want to turn this into an anti-Europe stream because I don't have as much of an issue with Europe as you do. But at the same time, the whole concept that Europe was going to challenge the dollar with the euro has now been absolutely destroyed,
Well,
and
you
they
see,
have
this is
no
again.
clue how they're going to get this debt off their shoulders. And so they tried to start a war in Ukraine that
Yep.
isn't working.
Well, I know you're right. But just think about what you just said, and then think about LIBOR. Like we established the dollar reserve system by the end of 1983. Like
Sure.
Bretton Woods fails in 68. The London gold pool fails in 68. Between 68 and 71, eventually the whole Bretton Woods system collapses. We have to go off the gold standard. Nixon closes the gold convertibility window in 71. We have nearly a decade of trying to establish the dollar as the world's reserve currency, right?
Yep.
That's the birthing pains of that. That is effectively established by 1983, right? As we come out of the recession created by Volcker's 19% interest rates and all of that, right?
Hmm.
1984, now all of a sudden we get LIBOR as the pricing mechanism for global dollars. And then 1985, we get the fucking Plaza Accord where we start um, maintaining um, currency exchange rates, managing currency exchange rates. What a shock! All that happens one after the other, and then for the next 25 years, all the way
Hmm.
to 23 years, all the way till 2008 when the dollar reserve standard fails and the banking system implodes. Then we enter into a coordinated central bank policy era for 10 years where everybody's coordinated at the zero bound in order to prop this LIBOR system up another 10 years or 12 years. What was that supposed to do? That was supposed to usher in MMT and divorce all major currencies from any and from all idea of debt eventually, and just keep us at the zero bound so we can have MMT to usher in central bank digital currencies and everything else. That was their plan. And that got disrupted when Brexit occurred and then when Trump was elected. Wall Street handed him Jerome Powell. Trump took their advice, like he did at the time because he didn't know what else to do. And I remember him saying, like, "Well, they handed me this guy Powell's name," and I said, and I went along with it, and now this guy's fucking me because Powell started raising interest rates, uh, you know, and didn't want to go back to the zero bound during COVID, and he was like freaking out, and he didn't understand what was going on because no one had put Trump in the loop at that point in 2020 because they knew he was going to be deposed from power. But the SOFR pilot program starts in 2017, and by 2022, right as Powell's first term is ending, we we ditched LIBOR completely, and
Hmm.
now euro dollars have to be priced at what we say they are, as opposed to what London says they should be priced at. And look at what you just said about the American Navy. It's
Yep.
exactly what been saying for 2 years now. The American Navy, Pax Americana via the American Navy, is the British Empire by proxy because they control the fucking value of the goddamn world's reserve currency,
Yep.
just like they did in the 19th century. These fucks.
I know.
Close the fucking loop. It's right there in front of you. So these fucking
I'm
whiny
well
assholes,
aware.
fuck you. These people for 350 years, they figured out how to enslave the world through currency arbitrage. I'm done. I'm over it. I don't want to live in that world anymore. It's led us to fucking pedophiles and Satanists running around and stealing our fucking kids and flooding the streets with fentanyl and all the other and world wars and all the rest of it. Fuck this noise. This shit's gotta end,
Right.
dude.
Yeah, but what was the one thing holding back all of this? And this is, I know I'm going to sound conspiratorial by saying this, but it's really a no-brainer, and it's been happening for a long time right now. And I've never stopped talking about it. I've been criticized for it, and I don't care because I'm getting to do a giant "I told you so" dance. The only thing that holds this up is if somebody steps in and says no more wars in the Middle East.
Yep.
Okay. And right now, you are seeing the end of the wars in the Middle East. There are
Yep.
no more wars to fight. There are no more weapons to be had. Yes, there still will be terrorism. Yes, there still be Muslim fanatics. I'm not giving them a pass and thinking that they're just going to curl up and hug everybody. But you
Right.
saw Trump do it with the Abraham Accords, and you saw the fact that Arabs that previously said they would never recognize Israel and they would never recognize an American presence, all of a sudden hugging and holding hands and saying, let's do this, even Saudi Arabia. And when Biden took over, which was the last death breath of the European American left hegemony, right?
Mm-hmm.
When they saw that, Saudi Arabia stepped back and a whole bunch of other countries and said, I'm not sure with Biden in power if we're going to be able to overcome Iran, which is, by the way, why Biden's been transferring tens of billions of dollars to Iran over the last 3 months, because they're trying to make it so that Iran survives.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But they're not going to. There's no more wars to fight. No one
Right.
gives a shit about the Houthis in Yemen. No one
Right.
gives a shit about Iran and their weird, like, we're going to take over the world. The Iranian resistance has been reduced to nothing. And the whole idea that Syria was going to complete the Iran Shia axis with Lebanon, it's over. Their military is done. I can show you the videos. They are impressive. They're done. They have no more planes. They have no more boats. They're
And
completely done. They are 100% neutered.
Mhm.
And I don't care if people, oh, it's a Jewish conspiracy, blah, blah, blah. Fuck you. Israel has been the most loyal client of the American dollar industry and the American military industry since the day the British and France left the Suez Canal. Okay, and it's taken a long, bloody, horrid road to get to where we are right now. And I'm not claiming that October 7th was on purpose. I think that October 7th happened because a green light was given to Iran that they would be able to fucking finally finish their little dance and complete their happy country line between Eastern Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and the Gaza Strip, and everything was in place. And then they thought that that attack would lead to a demoralized and destroyed Israel,
Mm.
another Middle Eastern war to make Trump the most evil person on earth because he's the only one who would come out and say, like, no, we're going to crush them. Biden would just have had step back and go, no, we have to stop this, or gotten us entangled into a Middle East war that we couldn't get out of. But now the power players that need to stop this madness have all succeeded. All of them.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a single one that hasn't succeeded. As I said, Hamas is done. Even if you want to say, well, they still have 20,000 fighters and a whole bunch of bottle rockets that they can shoot at Israel. Do you really think they can do anything? Gaza has been reduced to rubble. Okay. Even if tomorrow there's a ceasefire, the hostages are returned, everybody hugs and makes nice, Gaza will take 50 years to get back to where it was before this started.
Yep.
Lebanon is it's not just that they neutered with the pagers and with all of that. Yes, they knocked out how many hundreds and thousands of Hezbollah armed fighters. They literally decapitated the entire leadership of it. They got rid of Bashar Assad, who always talked out of both sides of his mouth. The Iran is teetering on the brink of nothingness. They've been proven to be a complete paper tiger. North Korea, who everyone thought was going to be Iran's love and savior, they're done. They've given up. They tried their little nonsense in South Korea, and South Korea just said, "Yeah, we're not getting uppity right now. Like enough." Right? Because the president decided to go with global Europe and go, "Oh no, I'm going to declare martial law." That lasted 15 minutes. You know,
No,
it's it's
I
it's
haven't gotten your take on this. Just stop. This is an interesting. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you on anything. But I have a I want you to put some more color on what you just said about South Korea and North Korea, because
uh
I wasn't sure what to make of. I didn't know what to make of South Korea at all. Um, so I just put some more color on that for me, if you wouldn't mind.
So I won't claim to be an expert on South Korea,
Okay.
okay? But what I have studied extensively, and just for all the audience people that have never heard of me before, I'm a geopolitical expert that focuses on the Middle East, Europe, and Russia. Okay, but I haven't focused extensively on China, but I follow it as anybody else would. Okay, North Korea has always been the country that was left out in the cold. Okay, but
Mhm.
and again, been talking about it for years. Nobody disagrees with me. They just disagree with me on how it could happen. North Korea doesn't care about nuclear sanctions, right? They were more than happy to explode a nuclear bomb. The one thing they've never been able to get right, and by the way, probably never will, is a
Right.
delivery system.
Right.
Okay, they failed in every missile test they've ever done. Now,
Right.
Iran, which everybody is not going to let get a nuclear bomb, always, and this was a big part of the Obama decolonization thing. Their program for ballistic missiles has always been pretty robust. It's not that
Right.
great, but it's robust, and it's enough working with Russian tech that they could deliver a ballistic missile capable of nuclear device to North Korea. Okay, but
Right.
the day was always going to come where North Korea and Iran just swapped, and North Korea said, "Okay, here's what
Right.
you need for the nuclear bomb," and Iran said, "Here's what you need for the ballistic missiles." That
Right.
was always going to happen, but now
Hmm.
it's not going to happen because nobody's going to let it happen.
Right.
And the thing is, North Korea can get uppity whenever they want. They are literally a failed country. They have nothing going for them. Have you seen all the articles about the North Korean soldiers that Kim Jong whatever sent into? I always get them confused. That he sent into Russia to fight for the Russian army, and all of them took one look at porn on the internet and freaked the fuck out, and now none of them want to go home.
Right.
North Korea needs a lifeline that's going to keep their weird system in place, but at the same time, not piss off the Americans enough that they're just going to greenlight a fucking color revolution there via South Korea. So North Korea decided to get a bit uppity, and the president of South Korea got the news that they're getting uppity, and he said, "Nope, I'm nipping this in the bud." And he ordered martial law, and the entire Korean government was like, "Absolutely not." With all of the chaos going on in the world right now, if you think we're getting involved in this, you are out of your mind. And that's exactly what they did. And what is the one thing everybody's been talking about? Every armchair warrior, every political pundit, you name it, they've been talking about one thing for the last fucking 10 years, and it hasn't been Ukraine. They've been talking about China retaking Taiwan.
Hmm.
Have you heard anything about it lately? Because I haven't.
No, the Chinese were never going to take. I never.
The
I never
Chinese
thought.
never had to take Taiwan. It's one of those things that it
Right.
makes sense when people say it, but they don't understand that there's no reason for China to take Taiwan. All
Exactly.
they have to do is get someone elected who agrees to sell them the shit they want anyway.
Right.
So
It's
they don't
always
need to
the
take Taiwan by force. Why would
Halsey,
they?
Halsey, I have it on very good authority from a lot of people who are close to the administration. They're like, that all talk about China taking Taiwan is the MIC trying to secure the next generation's worth of weapon systems. That's all
No,
it
no, no,
is.
no, 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 no. That's not what they were doing. We know what they were doing. They told us. The MIC didn't care about China and Taiwan. Okay. We like to pretend that they did, but they didn't. They never have. They never will.
Right.
Okay. What they care about is that we have access to the chips we need, which,
Hmm.
if you'll notice, what are they building in America? They're having trouble with it. But what are they building
Oh,
here?
I know that. Like, I have a guy on the ground, literally in Phoenix, like, and he works. He's an executive driver, so he's like a high end Uber driver, and he shuttles all the TMSC executives from the airport to all the TMSC plants that are being built out there. None of them
Exactly.
have ever been worried about the Chinese taking over Taiwan.
No.
Not
And you know
once.
what's even funnier is we always talk about the intertwining of Israel and the MIC.
Right.
Do you know that Intel's biggest production, like most advanced production plant, is in Israel?
Hmm. I know
And
that.
and
I've
it
known
has
that for
been for
years.
many, many years.
Many years, but Intel is but Intel that's going to be Intel is an interesting discussion, actually.
I know.
um
Let's not veer off because I will have
yeah,
that discussion with you, but I don't. I want to start taking some questions soon, and
sure,
I don't want to
sure.
veer off on another 2 hour tangent, which we will. But
Fair enough.
but
Fair enough.
what I'm saying though is that obviously I don't believe that there's just this grand master plan that's coming into
No,
acceptance.
this is the way I put it this morning is that, look, this is just everybody has their flow chart of how things are working out, and it's like move, counter, move, move, counter. Okay, so you did that. Okay, so then we have to do this, and you do this, and so history is ultimately. I'm half. I'm half. We like the post hoc narratives and through lines on history
Sure.
that are not real. Right. This is one of the things I've learned from Dexter White over the years. Since he's a historian primarily, and then everything else second. And he's like, he reminds me all the time. He's like, you're really good at creating narratives, but they're usually a little too linear. And he chides me for it on a regular basis. He keeps working with me
I do too.
on
I've tried to do on that for a couple times too.
sure, fair enough, and that's fine. So I'm halfway between now believing that history is just a bunch of shit that happened, and that that history is just a bunch of shit that happened, and a um and just a web of, well, these are all um every narrative that you can spin, right, is all dependent on what point of view of what player and what actor. You can write his story in a linear fashion. You can write somebody else's. You can write Putin's story in one as one linear thing. You can write Joe Biden's as another. You can write Netanyahu's as another. You can write Assad's for another. You can write, you know what I mean? And but at the end of the day, all these linear narratives intersect, and then we get the events that we get, and those events are the intersection of all these different incentives and all these different narratives of these people, and those narratives include all of their personal proclivities, their faults, their strengths, their weaknesses, their situations, and everything else. And so you have to. So when you sit down and you listen to two guys who really understand geopolitics well, it sounds like a bunch of. It sounds like that some version of the guy with all the all the pic the strings on the board with the pictures and the Fox Mulder thing. But it's not really that. It's just that
No.
it's just a big mosaic of different people's um uh what's the word I'm looking for, incentives a- and
Biases.
um not even that, just this is what they have to do to do their thing, whatever their thing is. They have their agenda, and they're trying to employ their agenda, and it's the intersection and how those agendas meet and then sometimes explode. That's what history is, and that's
There's
we have to
that,
remind
but
ourselves of it.
it's also remember that, like you said, it's not two guys sitting over a chessboard with strings and puppets and all of that.
Right.
What it is that when someone identifies a problem, they start saying, "How are we going to fix this problem long term?" Right?
Right.
China was always going to get access to Taiwan one way or the other, and I don't mean by taking it over by military force. They never had to do that. They just love to threaten it because it gets us to send all kinds of weapons to Taiwan, which ensures that China never has to invade. Okay. But
Right.
it was always going to happen because otherwise they're going to build their own stuff, right? They're going to build their own chip and eventually they'll get it right.
Hmm.
And nobody wants them to get it right. Everybody wants China importing everything, which they always have, which is why China imports all of its food, all of its clothes, all of its oil, all
Right.
of that stuff. China can't do any of that shit. That's why they had the one child policy, right? Because
Hmm.
they don't have, even if they have the natural resources, they don't have the ability to get it, which I don't even think they have most of them. So the problem was, what do we do when China gets access to Taiwan, or there's not enough chips to go around? And the answer was always, we have to bring it back to the United States because we can't trust another ally with it
Right.
because our relationships are rocky at best at any given time with an ally. And we
Well,
see what happens when we.
and I would also argue that, you know, think of the British model of whenever you pull back from a region that you've had a conflict in, you always leave a you always leave a possibility of being able to spring up a conflict later on. So when the chip industry is being built, we concentrated all on Taiwan because it's a single point of failure that everybody then needs to fight over or
Right.
worry about. Okay, same thing with North Korea. We leave North Korea and we leave the Korean Peninsula divided for one reason and one reason alone.
Electronics.
Because no, take one reason alone, because you can always spin up North Korea as a boogeyman whenever you need to fucking gin up a conflict. and
Right.
get everybody scared.
But you're again being very specific, and I'm not. But what I'm saying is that when you hear about bringing manufacturing back, right?
Hmm.
That's something that's one of those loaded terms that happens in government,
Hmm.
because when they say that, everyone in this room and me and you and everyone on the that's watching the shiny box or on social media, what they think is coming back, or that Trump wants to bring back, or anything like that, is that we're going to manufacture our own shower curtain rings and
Right.
our own acetaminophen and all of this, and we're gonna go back to the the pre-white collaring of America and have nothing but factories everywhere. Those
Right.
days are long gone. If anything, you'll see that happen. That more of it will go to Mexico and come out of China.
Or
But
or the new 51st state in Canada.
right,
Yeah,
one of the two.
especially after the Canadian dollar goes to $1.70.
I know, I agree. But the whole thing, but the whole thing that they're talking about American manufacturing is computer chips and
Hmm.
electronics and the things that we can do, and that we have the money to do, and that we have the people to do. Now, this is going to make everybody pissed off, and I'm sorry, but I have to tell you, this is why people on the right are so nuts about legal immigration. Like, I say deport them all. You say deport them all. We all agree the illegal should go. But the Republicans, even people like Trump, can't stop harping on the idea that we need to bring in legal immigrants. Why?
Hmm.
Because we need to know who we're bringing in and what they can accomplish.
Hmm.
Okay. There's a reason why we want programmers. There's a reason why we want the
Oh
people
yeah,
who build chips. There's a
we want the
reason why
best
we
people.
want skilled
We
labor.
want the best people. We don't want people who are being brought in, especially who are either Chinese agents or European agents. These are people that are like we can't have we can't have an invasion, right? Like we have had on the southern border, but we absolutely can have legal immigration in a brain drain capacity.
Right.
You know,
Because I
we
mean,
can brain
you've
drain the
heard him
world.
say it
We're
a
okay
hundred
with that.
times.
What's
I
that?
did my master's thesis on this years ago, and I've been saying this, and all of you made fun of me at first, and then when I explain myself, it gets a little bit more clear. I've been saying all along that the one thing that's missing from all the puzzles that are going on in the world is that no one's declared war on the cartels. Because
Right.
literally, Mexican labor, intellectual power, and manufacturing ability is half the price of China's and just as good.
Right.
Okay. So, but the only thing stopping it is the cartels. And
Mhm.
everyone says, oh, well, we want to stop fentanyl. We want to stop illegal immigration. We want to stop all this. Yes, that's true. But it will require actual military action against the cartels. Now, how can they accomplish it without the military action? We know the playbook. It's already been done here. It was done with the Italian mob. We went after them as hard as we could, but we gave them an out to go legit with their money,
Yeah.
which is exactly why they're building the chip plants in Phoenix, which is exactly
Mm.
why they're building them all over the southern border. Because
Oh,
if
okay.
we give the cartels an out, now I'm not saying every gangster is just going to
Right.
go legit tomorrow, obviously not.
Right.
But if we give Mexico just even the tacit agreement that if they get in trouble militarily, we'll come help them, that if the
Mm.
cartels fight back too hard, we'll come assist. Look at what they've done with the border. Trump said,
Right.
"I want you to close the border. I'm going to put on tariffs." Done. You know,
Right.
like what? Do you think Mexico was really that terrified that avocados would cost more here? They already cost a lot of money, and nobody gives
Right.
a shit.
Well,
You know
it's
what I'm
because
saying? Like,
yeah, that's big. That's because we had that's because again we can go back to zero bound money and avocado toast and like
I know.
that's it's all retarded, right? That's all going away. So, but yeah, no, that makes sense. That's an interesting angle on that. I like that. And anybody who doesn't think that the Mexicans can produce things well, I have one. I just tell you, made in Mexican Fender Stratocasters are as good as Americans, if not better.
Bro, this has been studied so ad nauseum.
I know.
Okay, that and nobody knows it because nobody looks it up. There have
Mhm.
been economic studies that have determined that Mexico can produce just as much, if not more, than China at half the cost, and they
Mhm.
have the ability and the intellectual capacity and the skilled labor.
Mhm.
Okay, it's just it's
Mhm.
always been kind of discounted because the idea that the cartels control the government,
Mhm.
which by the way they would just become the government in a sense,
Right.
and number two, because there's always been this idea that we want the Mexicans to pick our strawberries.
Right.
Okay. which we still can do. That's not a problem. If you want to import agricultural workers, they're going to do it. I don't want it, but it will happen. Okay, but if you give them a reason to go home, the ones that can't do anything better than pick strawberries will still come over and pick strawberries and then go home.
Hmm.
But the ones that can create computer chips and do all of that, they don't want to stay here either. They'd be
Yeah,
just as fine coming in for 2 month clips and working remotely.
of
And
course.
the labor that's required to run the factory, these have been studied so distinctly and exhaustively.
Hmm.
People think I'm nuts when I bring it up, and then I say, just Google it, and you can read all the studies yourself. And
Right.
usually people come back to me, they're like, I had no idea that Mexico had this capability. It's not only do they have it, they've been trying to export it for a lot of years, and we just never did because we could get China to do it for a more stable way, let's say. But
Well,
China's on their feet at this point. And I was arguing this morning, and then we'll open
actually,
up for questions.
let's just stop for a second. Remember also that the reason that the globalists wanted it to go to China was because that's where the globalists were going to that's where they were planning on. Remember, my model on these people, going back to Europe and the UK, is that these people are locusts.
Hmm.
Okay, they're not vampires; they're locusts. They
Agreed.
they they destroy they go into a place, they rape it clean, and they move to the next one. China was the next one on their list,
Sure.
and they thought they were going to be able to put all their money into China and then control China, and that may have been in process. And then I'll be honest with you, like Xi or don't like Xi, he put the kibosh on that. The Chinese never opened up their capital account and creating a single open currency that we could then that City of London can then manipulate. And because of that, um it failed, and the Chinese defended themselves quite um quite well. The Russians were never given that opportunity because with the fall of the Soviet Union, we that the West did rape Russia, like
For
dry.
sure.
And so that's the difference between the two of them. And because I'm just making sure that we close the loop for the audience here. I'm not. I don't think
Well,
you go
because
anywhere.
I'm going to close it even further. China had a model. They knew what was going to
Right,
happen because it happened to India.
right. And don't ever and no, and don't ever underestimate just how much the Chinese fucking hate the British.
Oh yeah, I know, but China had to be the one to tell Britain to go fuck itself because India
Right,
never would.
right. Well, that's very clear, and that's why in the last couple of years you saw this concerted effort to push um, Indians with deep British ties into positions of power all over the West,
Sure.
because that's the way the British locusts were trying to worm their way out from underneath the um, the ass raping they were about to get, and
Right.
that's also begun to fail. Which is, by the
Okay, but the
way, why I was so skeptical of Vivek when he hit the scene earlier in the year.
same with
Because
me, by the way. I
yeah,
had the same
I
problem.
just saw another friggin' Indian going, "Oh my freaking God, him too?" No, he doesn't get to run America. And it turns out that I was wrong about that. I honestly think I was wrong about that. I've
So
come
do I.
around on Vivek, but it was a natural reaction given everything that we were seeing, right?
Sure.
So apologies, Vivek, do your job, dude. I'm on board. But
Right.
one out of 12. Okay, so I saw 12, terrible people like Sadiq Khan and this one and the guy who ran Google and the guy who ran Twitter before Elon bought the place and blah 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 blah. Like, it was clearly that's what they were doing, and the British were
Sure.
sidling up, and they were doing everything they could to bind Modi down in India proper. And the big tell on all this, by the way, was on the eve of the BRICS summit, the Chinese and the Indians finally, resolved their border conflict in like 20 minutes
Which, by the
after
way,
both
was
sides.
the only thing I cared about of that entire conference, and I watched almost all of it. That was the
Right.
only thing I found significant.
Well, of course, because what it meant was the two of them finally just said, "Oh my God, why are we allowing these fucking limeys to triangulate between us?
Right.
Why are we
But
doing
I
this? Why
wanted
do
to
we
bring
keep
up a
falling for this? How about we stop falling for this bullshit? Yeah, you know what? Why don't
so
we just be friends? Fuck off."
it was funny because I was having this argument today on the show, and I specifically wasn't wrapping it up on the show that I was on earlier because I wanted to talk about it tonight. And this puts the end to it all. I know I've said that a few times, but I keep coming back to this point, is that I was arguing with a very good friend of mine about globalization,
hmm
right? And remember that there are different definitions of the word, but I'm basically talking about open border free trade.
Right.
Okay, like I'm not talking about global homo or any of that stuff. I'm
Right.
talking about just open border free trade. Everybody is seems to be in agreement that globalization failed because of what it turned into.
Right.
Okay, globalization has been the most resounding success that we've ever seen on an earth-wide basis in the history of anything.
Mm.
We have seen poverty basically disappear,
Right.
like in comparison to what it was.
hmm
People aren't dying because there isn't enough food. People are dying because they can't get the food because there's so many corrupt fuckers out there. What
hmm
you're seeing is, as I said, you're not seeing a bunch of European and Jewish and whatever bankers sitting around trying to figure out how to divide up the world. What you're seeing is that no one knows what comes next.
hmm
No one knows what to do with this. What do
Yes.
we tried communism, it didn't work. Everybody starved. We tried liberalism and it didn't really work
Mm-mm.
because populism can take over a country and then you have World War II.
Right.
Okay? What we're trying to figure out, what everyone is trying to figure out is how do we take this new system that ensures prosperity if it's done right and do it right because no one's figured it out yet.
Mm-mm.
And trust me, the other sides are fighting back like crazy. That's why you're seeing the surveillance states, and
Yes.
that's why you're seeing all these conflicts, and that's why you're seeing laws that limit what you can say and laws that limit what you can do. I'm not saying it's not going down kicking and screaming, but what
Right.
I'm saying is when you hear about go in the pods and eat the bugs and do all of this, that's all very real because no one
Yeah.
knows what to do next.
Right.
No one knows how to take this global system we've created and turn it into something that people can live with.
Well, what's coming is I think Vince Solange and I have been able to figure out what's coming. Part of what's coming next, which is that we're going to have a re-regionalization of global trade
Sure.
at this point, where it's a global system, but it's going to be a global system that's with regional manufacturing, with regional um uh, with regional currency blocks and tendrils, specific tendrils between each area. And the as the governments because the governments all don't trust each other anymore, and rightly so. So you have to have trusted intermediaries who act as the ones who can um ensure that the money gets to where it's going to go. So in the gold trade, we identified this in the gold trade. We were looking at what we see as the soft capital controls that have been put up, that we're starting to see put up around gold, physical gold in the United States. We're clearly seeing this, by the way, and that
Hmm.
is that J.P. Morgan and HSBC are now the only custodians for GLD and SLB, right? And the COMEX is literally going out of its way to marginalize itself, and while the LBMA doesn't know what the fuck to do. And the reason the London Bullion Market Association, but the COMEX is being depreciated so that it's no longer a physical exchange. This is why they're issuing, for example, this week. There's two reasons why they're issuing. They announced this 1 ounce gold eagle gold futures contract. Two reasons for this. The first, of course, is that it's a cash settled futures contract, so that it's to keep so to allow the COMEX to actually be continue to be relevant in some way. Um, in the new regime that's coming, physical gold is not going to flow around the world. Physical gold is going to be remonetized as collateral for the new monetary system. Okay,
Sure.
and that's why we're not going to let gold go anywhere. The Chinese aren't letting the gold to go anywhere. The idea that there's a currency that the Chinese or the Russians or the Indians or anybody else can come onto the COMEX and buy hundreds of tons of gold off the COMEX and then ship it overseas, those days are over. Okay, you're going to be able to do FX hedging, forex hedging, with gold, but you're not, and um, uh, you'll be able to do so with cash settled futures contracts that are denominated in gold, but and there'll be both GLD and maybe this new 1 ounce gold COMEX contract. But there will be no physical gold moving around. So the COMEX is going to move away from being a physical gold and silver exchange. That's one. The second thing, and this may be a little out of date, but it bothers excuse me, it bothers me because I also know that um, that 1099s, when you sell gold, right? The seller is obligated to issue a 1099 for any sale of gold against any denomination of gold where there is a COMEX registered futures contract traded in the United States. So this is why people don't really like to buy Krugerrands or Canadian Maple Leafs or 400-ounce gold bars, for example. They don't physically buy those a lot in the United States. They buy 1-ounce gold Eagles because there's no 1099. If you go to sell your 1-ounce gold Eagles, there's no 1099 for you to have to pay capital gains tax. You want to pay capital gains tax on a non-reportable transaction. That's between you, your conscience, and your accountant, right?
Yeah.
And whether the IRS can get to you on this. This feels like a backdoor into getting more surveillance over how much people are actually buying and selling gold. Um,
Hmm.
and that seems like a last gasp of an IRS that is about to get neutered. It's another one of those things. It's another one of those little poison pills that are being left behind in the for the Trump administration, the incoming Trump administration, to deal with. But I don't know. In the wake of Chevron and Jarkissi, I'm having a hard time believing that there's any kind of administrative state that's going to survive this this next administration if it's allowed to function and even half as effectively as it's advertising itself to be going forward. Like they may not be, so Elon and Vivek might not be able to cut 2 trillion from the budget, but they certainly can cut 1, for example, and
Right.
they can get rid of some of the regulations that were that were adjudicated under Chevron. You know,
Sure.
but some of them are still going to survive. But if we can get rid of fucking Cafe, and we can get rid of the big ones, right? Cafe and the light bulbs, and the toilets, and all the shit that really pisses people off, and a lot of the safety regulations, a lot of the OSHA bullshit, a lot of the HR bullshit. Like they have no idea what's coming. No one has any idea what the United States looks like when it's not bound down in a James Burnham-esque managerial state. They have no idea what we're capable of, because the vestiges of it are still there. We have a banking system that is still vibrant enough. We still have 14,000 banks in the United States. Well, we used to have
I
more
know.
than that, but like we still have a banking system that is capable of very rapidly reorganizing how we handle capital and invest in our own resurgence as a country that no other country on the planet has. And
Oh, I
this
know.
is I think the thing everybody's fucking missing. And I've been screaming about this for 3 years. I'm like, guys, it's coming. Wall Street wants it. They've got the Fed. The Fed's got every fucking program in place ready to do this. And all you have to do is end Operation Choke Point 2.0, and well, 1.0 is over, but 2.0, you end up ending all of this shit. That's why all of this stuff about Operation Choke Point is coming out now, because
I know.
it's so important that this ends, so that we can stop debanking people, we can stop deplatforming them, and and the whole AI surveillance state thing that Mike Benz is talking about ends. Like this is a there's a and that just goes to your point. What I'm saying is that goes to your point about people. No one knows what to do. No, people do know what to do, Halsey. It's just a question of whether or not they're going to be allowed to unwind it that quickly, quickly enough to actually um, avoid
Accomplish it.
the worst of the reorganization, because the reorganization is going to be very painful, but it can be less painful the quicker it's allowed to flourish. I go back to kind of classic Austro-libertarian analysis of depressions where the government didn't intervene. Like there's a classic one, which is the Depression of 1920, and how Warren Harding got the appellation "Do Nothing Harding." While this shit was going on in 1920, everybody's like, "You got to do something." He's like, "No, I don't. Like let the thing let it let it play itself out. It'll be over in a year." And he was right. and it was over in a year. And then we had some of the highest growth rates the country had ever experienced, because you allow the liquidation of the previous round of inflation's malinvestment that was brought on by the creation of the Federal Reserve, and World War One, and the Hoover administration getting involved in World War One. You liquidate that quickly, and by the end of 1921, we were off to the races. It was an 18-month depression, and it was a massive depression. GDP contracted by like 10%,
I know.
and then it grew like 11% the next year, and we were off to the races. And then we had the roaring, and part of the reason we had the roaring 20s, of course, is because there was a sovereign debt crisis in Europe, so a lot of money came flowing in. But blah blah blah. But the basic idea is still the same. So in effect, what I'm arguing for here is that what we're talking about is the possibility of that very thing happening here in the U.S., and no one's prepared for it, because we've all lived under this incrementalism, this oh, it's too big to unwind tomorrow, and blah. No, it's really not. We can we, we can we can turn this shit thing around pretty fucking quickly if we just take 500,000 friggin' government workers on UBI and send them and put them on 2-year severance, and then, well, so they're not fucking shit up and causing civil unrest, pay them off and get them off the unfunded liabilities of the country's books for the next 30 years, and then put them back to work 2 years from now, which is what's going to happen. That's what Vivek is talking about. He's absolutely right. Like, just put them on 2 year
Okay.
severance. So,
Yeah,
but go
I
ahead.
know. They're
Yeah,
not coming to work anyway.
right. They're not working anyway. We're just paying them.
Right. But they're not even coming into the office. It's not even like we have to worry about, like, what are we going to do with them? They're also working at home anyway.
Right. Well, and my point is that if the paycheck's coming in, then they're going to get uppity. And
Right.
so you leave them on a 2 year severance where they're still getting paid, and they have plenty of time to to go through the 5 stages of grief over how their UBI was taken away from them, and then they get back, and then when they look up, there's like jobs for them out there that actually give them purpose and meaning, as opposed to sitting around all day watching fucking porn and The View.
Exactly.
So
So,
yeah.
guys, I hope everyone understands that while we live in a very, very, very dangerous world and a very, very fucked up world, and we can sound very negative at times, this is extreme optimism that you're
Hmm.
seeing from both of us,
Hmm.
because the way the chips have fallen, and I didn't say it was going to be painless, but
Hmm.
things are really looking up for not just our system in our country, but for a globalized system. Not meaning that I want globalization. That's not what I'm talking about. I got shit for it earlier. What I mean is that the systems that need to exist independently are becoming more independent. And the,
Hmm.
the, the systems that tied us all together in a way that was just completely destructive to what any of our countries want to do is falling apart, and it's falling apart very rapidly. And it'll be very interesting to see what direction this goes. But let's open up for questions, because I don't want to. As I said, we let's do it.
We're
And I
yeah
have to figure
we're
out
we're
how
now
to.
we're almost 2 hours in, and we're sitting here like we haven't even touched on half of the things that we'd love to do. So, all right, everybody's got
Yeah.
their hands up. So why don't you handle that, Halsey, and we'll go from there.
So let me think. I don't even know how to do it. This is actually the first space that I've ever run.
Oh,
So
it's
I'm
actually
sure
not that
there's.
difficult. I did one the other on election night. You just basically say to the person who's got their hand up, and you go, "Person got their hand up." You just like allow them to talk. I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, but I'm
It's not
saying
that
I can't
difficult.
even see anybody with their hands up.
Oh, there's one. David S has got his hand up. I'm gonna let him talk.
You can do it. You
David, you're
actually
on the air. Go for it.
you have the ability, right?
Yeah, yeah. As a co-host, I just said it.
So you do it.
David S, you're on the air. What do you got, dude?
Well, I wanted to talk for a second about Israel and the Middle East since you shifted the subject. I
Hmm.
do want to share this that in Brazil, where the surveillance state is as bad as it can get, you do have CBDCs coming in with DEX on January 1st, and they are going to be very, very aggressive about it.
Hmm.
So don't think that we're out of the,
We're not.
out of the weeds yet.
No, we're
So,
not.
and it's going to be very, very tough. Have you heard about the DEX system? It's going to be tough.
No, I don't know a
Sure.
lot. So I'd love to hear. I'd love, fill us in. I'm happy to listen.
Well, okay, basically all city and municipal employees and state employees are going to be paid by DEX, and apparently they're not going to have any way to convert that into cash in any single manner.
Right.
So it's totally digitalized, and people are actually trying to figure out how to do barter with DEX. I don't know how that's going to work, but that I will learn more about it and fill you guys in. But Brazil has always been kind of a guinea pig for certain different projects, and it seems like
Mhm.
this one is one of them. So I'll save the Middle East stuff for later because I think it's more interesting.
Well, what I'll
I,
say
I
to
admittedly
that,
don't know a lot about them,
uh,
the South American systems either.
yeah, and neither do I. What I'll say to this, David, is that I've watched shit like this before, and people are really creative, and they'll figure out a way to do barter. They will. Like the people who create these systems aren't nearly as clever as they think they are. Like they think they're the smartest. I always fall back on the adage that they may be the smartest people in the room, but they're not smarter than the room. And there's a lot of Brazilians. They'll figure it out. They'll figure out how to collapse that system so fast. It'll be funny. If you couldn't get a CBDC off the ground in Nigeria, you're not going to get one off the ground in Brazil.
Especially
And
now that
with
Lula's been hospitalized with like a brain bleed.
Mhm.
I mean, the government in Brazil is so stupid. It's not even funny. And remember also what happened with India when they tried to force everybody not to have cats very far.
Right,
But
right.
coming up now.
Yeah, and they're doing the same. They're doing the same thing in Europe, like by limiting the denomination of the currencies. They're doing the same thing. Eventually, all these systems will collapse. People will go back to trading fucking salt, dude. They need to. Like they just will.
Yeah.
Like I mean,
Also, a country can be gauged, and again, this is something I say all the time, and people laugh, and then they look into it. And a country needs a thriving black market.
hmm
Without it, people that have no ability to survive in a structured system will starve, and
hmm
they'll turn to crime, and they'll turn
yep,
to violence.
yep,
A thriving black system takes care of a lot of the people that we would have to throw in jail and fight because they're able to support a system that doesn't really need any kind of rules that they can't enforce themselves. And then
Yeah,
you're
I'm
talking
really
about
happy.
major immigrant communities, you're talking about religious communities. Now, I'm not talking about like selling drugs and stuff like that. I mean like selling
Oh,
food
look,
and selling
Halsey.
clothes.
Halsey, I made my money in basically currency arbitrage in Venezuela and other countries, and so I mean I've been playing the a black market ever since Syria and Israel in the '70s, and that is how people survive even today. In Israel, you
hmm
go to the Orthodox communities; they're still getting from Turkey and Euro One and black market. You take that away and you squeeze people, crime is going to go up. And all these guys sitting in offices looking at, like Thomas said in Moscow, paper metrics about how wonderful things are while people starve. Paper metrics have nothing to do with what's on the ground. So you need that flexibility. And that's what they're
hmm
trying to eliminate. Okay. So,
Yeah, and David, what I would also say is that we live in a world. I hate to, and I know both Halsey and I are advocates of. We live in a world of crypto. We live in a world that someone can spin up tomorrow, can spin up a fucking proof of work coin, or at some point people will figure out how to deal with this stuff, and what will eventually happen with this fucking Dex is that it will trade at a discount to something else, and then it
Hmm.
will just collapse under its own weight. And government script has never been able to compete with free market money, and without the force of guns and the force of taxation and everything else. Now they're going to get some buy-in, and it's going to Brazil will just wind up becoming a multi-currency scenario. Like when I was studying with Peter over in Vietnam, he had to, he blew my mind because I never even considered it. He's like, Tom, you do realize this is 2011 Vietnam. He said, you do realize that Vietnam is a tri-currency country. There's the dong, which people use to buy coffee and cab rides and shit, which is it's garbage. And then there's the dollar, which they use for almost everything else. And then there's gold for the really important shit. Like real estate transactions and everything else were literally done in physical gold. And eventually, the State
Yeah.
Bank of Vietnam made a move against private ownership of physical gold and pulled it out of the monetary system. And they haven't solved anything in Vietnam by doing that. So, so you know what happened when they started doing that? Vietnam became the first country to really use Bitcoin on a regular basis. And there were kiosks and coffee shops and everything else all over Ho Chi Minh City taking Bitcoin back in 2011, 2013. Dead serious.
I have
It,
a conspiracy theory on that, by the way. Like, I don't know. I literally thought of it myself, but I'll be interested to see if they if in El Salvador, the reason they delayed announcing this $3 trillion unmined gold reserve is
Right.
because they've been planning to back Bitcoin with it. Because they're the only country in the world, which by the way, the IMF is fighting back against
Hmm.
heavily. They're the only country that requires Bitcoin to be accepted as currency.
Hmm.
But it could be bad. Their reserves of it could be backed by gold at this point.
Oh yeah, that was, and that's another, yeah, it's another great point. And again, you know, it's going to be very, it's going to, look, at the end of the day, like the Brazil is going to lose out in the long run on, the foreign exchange, because the Brazil is an exporting country, for Christ's sake. Like they export soybeans, they export coffee, they export oil and gas and this and that, everything else. Like no one's going to take their decks as a, foreign exchange currency. Like, so what, so how do they, as other currencies flow into the country, that's going to compete with with this stuff, and the DEX will be used at the convenience stores, the supermarkets, and all this other stuff, and they'll pay their taxes in it, and it'll just kind of circulate and do its thing. And then the rest of the economy, like the Italian economy, to this day, the Italians still have resisted. They still do everything in cash.
Yep.
Like 30% of the Italian economy is still unreportable to the government agency.
And remember,
And
with Brazil, and then we'll go on to the next one. With Brazil,
sure,
they have a choice to make. Do they want to go the way of Argentina, or do they want to go the way of Venezuela?
right.
And they'll have to make that choice fairly soon.
So
Well,
thank you. That was
may
sure.
help them because the currency is crashing. The currency is down to 615, which is the highest it's been, well, the
Hmm.
lowest it's been since the real was put in by Fernando Enrique. And that's
Hmm.
just happened in the last 2 months. And it's a good time for me, not a good time for them.
Well, wow.
No, I
So I
hear
haven't
you.
been following the Brazilian real. Well, how far has it fallen in the last 2 months?
Well, it went from a year ago, it was 515, and now it's 615 and
650.
going
Yeah.
up to about 25.
Right. No, I mean, okay. That's so, yeah. Well, okay, great. That's, the last time I looked at the Brazilian real, I think it was trading in the threes. So I haven't looked at it in a long time. I'm just,
That
Me
so
neither.
thank you for the update on that.
Okay, next.
Do we have anybody? Let's see. Request. Okay, so David, I'm going to take you off speaker. I'm going to let Warhound Actual. You're good. And then David, I will cut you. Oh, okay, there we go. Yes. Warhound Actual, you there?
Hey, what's good? Sorry,
Sorry, hold on. Go ahead. Try it again. You good?
am I good?
Yeah, you're good.
I
I'm
can hear
sorry.
All
you.
I'm
right.
like,
Yeah,
yeah, we're good.
Twitter decided to spaz out there for a second for me. I'm on mobile, so it's kind of a pain.
Hey, you're good.
Um, just to comment on the the central bank digital currency stuff real quick.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to roll out stuff in India as well. I got a contact there that I talk to on the regular, and they're trying to roll that stuff out there as well. And it's
Mm.
been hilarious listening about it because like people are fighting against it so goddamn bad it's unfucking real.
Cool.
Um, so in regards to domestic stuff when it comes to the United States, so we've got the uh, we've got little Marco Rubio getting put
Mm-hmm.
in as Secretary of State, and then we've got the discussions that have been going on, certain things that Trump has been saying, the whole Governor Trudeau thing.
So
I
hilarious.
love that, by the way. I loved it, by
That's
the way.
what I thought it was
Me
epic
too.
troll, dude. Epic
Oh
troll.
yeah, 100%. Now, here's the question I've got is do you see this potentially being basically a revitalization of the Monroe Doctrine, and now the Monroe Doctrine is going to start applying more heavily to our neighbors to the north and our neighbors to the immediate south in a way that it didn't before? And do you think that this is just going to lead to an acceleration of us basically being like, hey, the North American Federation is now a thing. Y'all get to be part of us, and you don't have a
Um,
choice.
I think that Marco Rubio as Secretary of State is a clear signal that American foreign policy is pulling away from China and pulling away from the Middle East and pulling back towards North America, which is something that we should have been doing ages ago, or North and South
I
America.
couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I think it's very, very obvious that that's what this is about, and and in many ways it's a very good thing. It's and this that's I think it's that simple. And yes, Like going back to what Halsey said about Mexico earlier and all that. So I'll leave it. Halsey, you take it from here. So
What I was saying about Mexico applies, but what you're also looking at is that Canada is a natural resource state.
mhm.
They're not necessarily a
Absolutely.
technological state. What do they need? They need the strawberry pickers. And guess what? They're fulfilling their role with it great because of mistaken liberalism. Okay, they've imported so much of the third world, they don't even know what to do with it anymore. You can't even get a fucking house in Toronto that anyone can afford. But at the same time, what you're seeing is a reorganization towards the idea that these people can absolutely get jobs producing natural resources. If they're willing to shut their border, which Governor Trudeau has kind of like indicated by flying to Mar-a-Lago 8 seconds after Trump got elected, I think that he understands his little, I'm going to be just like Europe thing is over. And if he starts actually agreeing to seal the border from the immigrants that he will not stop importing, and it won't stop under any other administration either. I think
So,
that yes, that is a very distinct possibility that you're going to see a reshuffling of the North American continent towards export that we haven't seen yet, even though we're already a massively exporting continent.
well, and to also comment on this from my dude Goose is in the space right now, and I think he'd love to comment on the whole situation up in Canada right now. He's in Alberta. I also have another question. So you guys were referring to the whole European vampirism of China and everything, and I kind of look at it from more of a historical point of view. Do
Sure.
you believe that the whole situation with that is because they were attempting, in essence, to create the conditions to basically bring the industrial what's the term that the guy used, basically the industrial center of the world back to Europe, because the whole idea that China is the technological, cultural, and industrial heart of the world, 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, and then Europe eventually catches up, takes on that mantle, and then it kind of goes back to China, and then all of a sudden the U.S. steps on the scene, and the U.S. then becomes the big dog, and so Europe is trying to reestablish itself, and that's why they're going after China so hard, because they want to remove China from the board permanently and just get rid of them as an adversary.
So I think what you're missing is the way that Europe um, sees places like China is not as a industrial manufacturing center or anything. What they see them as is the Dutch East India Company. They want to be able to be the middleman that shuffles goods and services out of China and India, and to some extent, Japan's lost to them, but everywhere else, they want to be the middleman that keeps them relevant on these type of things. And nobody wants it because historically, and I'm not even talking about the opium wars, I'm just talking about historically, it's not just the animosity towards Britain that China has for the opium wars. It's that everywhere that this system has been tried, it has led to absolute
Oh,
destruction
yeah,
of
the
the
East India
country
Trade
that it was
Company.
tried.
We all know that history.
Right. So what I'm saying is that at this point, I think that the wariness of the rest of the world towards Europe is coming out more and more. And when you're seeing that the same sentiment exists here in the United States, with Trump and his people and the kind of rejection of the Democratic left, I think you're seeing more of an idea that our banks, our economists, our political leadership sees more of a benefit to two independent countries that can trade with each other and bring different things to the table than they do making one subservient to the other. And I think that we've spent a very many decades now making everybody subservient to us, and all it's led to is war and terrible shit all over the world. And I think that you're seeing a lot of people are just basically saying they don't want to see that anymore, and no one knows what the future is with that. So I think that we're entering into a very special, unique time in the history of the world, and how it turns out, I'm far from qualified to tell you. But I think that the Euro model of colonialism and economic subjugation, I think, is going to go the way of the dodo.
We must return to the era in which the United States and Russia looked at Europe as a whole and said, "We will fucking kill you."
Or at least we'll split you and run you ourselves.
Hey, I've made a joke for a long fucking time that we need to take Britain as a whole, turn that into a big, just aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean next to Europe, and then turn the rest of Europe, minus Eastern Europe, because I like the Russians. I do like the Russians a lot, but turn the rest of Europe into a nature reserve.
Uh, and you know what? Like, I'm not going to say whether I like or dislike the Russians. I don't look at nations like that. I look at nations as having potential or non-potential. And the thing about Russia is that Russia has been kicked around for so many years now. They're not any better or any worse than a lot of other countries. They've just been absolutely decimated
well,
by the system that they weren't prepared to enter in the first place.
well, I actually have a question then, because and I think Tom might like talking about this a little bit as well. Um, what is your opinion on this idea? Because I kind of look at the Russians and the Americans in kind of the same light. You know, there's key differences, of course, but at the end of the day, it's like there's a lot of cowboy culture between the two of them, and there's a lot of frontiersman style views of the world where it's like, hey, strap on the boots, let's go out to the fucking woods and take down a bear. Well, in our case, we like hunting mountain lions, but that's just us. And just that idea that there's a lot more similarities between the two groups than there is differences necessarily.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't want to get into manifest destiny and stuff like that. We tamed the West out of pure will and ingenuity. And I'm not saying we're better or worse than anybody because I don't know, like, culturally, we're better. And our culture was based on the idea that you had two choices: you starved or you build, right? That's the story of America. And can Russia do that too? Time will tell. I really don't know because they haven't built very well. They've spent a lot of time trying to catch up to countries that are so uniquely different that I think the amount of lives lost, the amount of treasure spent, the amount of just sheer waste that's gone on in Russia, can they just can they have their own manifest destiny? Maybe. Can they break apart into several countries, which would probably be best for them in the first place? Maybe. But I think that there's a lot of work to be, and I don't like, as I said, I'm not putting it on to whether I like or dislike them. I'm putting it on to that they have a lot of challenges ahead, and I think the biggest first step they did was that they told Europe that they weren't going to play this stupid game anymore.
Mhm.
And I think that if they can keep it up, because Putin's not going to live forever, and if
Right.
they can keep it up past Putin, I think they have like a lot of opportunities that they previously didn't have. So again, the future will tell. But I think yes, I think they have the ability. I just don't know if they have the will.
Well, what I'll say is this: they have remember that at one point, in the past, there were 400 million Russians. Now there's only 145,
Sure.
150. They've lost a lot of people, and fighting all of these
Absolutely.
stupid fighting these stupid European wars, and fighting wars internally that were the a consequence of being, overthrown, effectively color revolution in 1917. And, then allowing Stalin to run roughshod over their own people for God knows how many years and everything else.
And Tom also
So,
brings up. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
so what I was just going to say is that I think the will is certainly there, and I think that when I look at culturally what's happened in Russia since Putin, that they went through their long dark tea time of the soul in the 1990s, where it was literally a country and a society on collapse, and they've had to rebuild to where they are now. And I'm talking culturally and as a people, I've heard many things about Russia as I've studied them over the last decade. I keep going back to, the a couple of things, and it's about the churches. They're building churches all over Russia, and they have been for 20 years now. And that, in the United States, they say, in the United States, the parents still drag the children to church. The kids don't want to go because they've been infiltrated. We've been infiltrated with Marxism. In Russia, it's the kids dragging the parents back to church.
Yep.
And
And I
that's,
saw that firsthand.
yeah,
So
and so that's what's going to happen. And Putin has been like Viktor Orban in Hungary, and others have all been saying, look, I will subsidize you having babies. I will bring stability back so that you're not using abortion as the primary means of birth control. That deaths by alcoholism, abortions as the percentage of live births. All of these metrics for the Russians are very, very. They're down 90% since Putin took over. And he has a plan. He's executed that plan. The West has done everything imaginable to stop him from being able to execute that plan, to keep them on the ropes. And he'll be okay with, having to not get everything he wants out of Ukraine if he can get a guarantee that Russia can have a generation or two and be free of this constant nattering by the British and by the Europeans, and and somewhat by the Americans, who are extensions, aspects of the Americans who are extensions of those other two groups. Trump represents, and Trump's cabinet represents. I think Trump's cabinet is far more indicative of where Russia's future is. To say that this is a cabinet that's designed to focus on cleaning up America. And if we're cleaning up America, that means we're not adventuring around the world. And that disempowers the colonial shitbags of Europe to continue to, make a mess everywhere else that they can. It's old McKinderist politics of in continental Europe refused to die. And you're seeing the last gasp of this as they try to gin up conflicts all across Russia's southern border, all the way out to China, and Georgia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh, Turkey, this, that, it's all part of that same strategy. That strategy goes away when there aren't the same numbers of trillions of shit dollars issued at the zero bound, which can be infinitely levered up to cause regime change operations around the world. Like the CIA has to go out and they have to actually grow opium and sell it on the open market in order to fund their own operations. And that's it. They don't get hundreds of billions of dollars in USAID and National Endowment for Democracy and all of these fucking NGOs. All that shit's going to end on January 21st. I'm
I
firmly
actually agree on that.
I'm firmly convinced of this. I have this on good authority from people inside the transition team that they know what to do and how to stop the money. And once the money flow stops, and we're already seeing Mike Benz goes out there and does Joe Rogan and lifts the lid on this whatever that dirty trick squad is, and then they turn right around and say, okay, well we're defunding that, or we're reorganizing that, we're going to try and split it up again and throw it into three or four different, go underground, right? And it's so obvious what's happening here that it's just locusts or cockroaches trying to scurry back into the corners to come back and fight another day. But I don't think it's going to work.
Also,
I just
remember
don't.
something, and I'll have my Aaron Sorkin moment right now. Okay, and both of you hit on this, and it's something that when it gets brought up, it's put into such a negative light that people don't even understand what we're talking about anymore. The real danger to Russia, to China, to the U.S., to Europe already made their decision. They're done. Like Tom said, this is the final unwinding of the European continent. It's not the final unwinding. You're looking at it on too short a timeline. It's
Mhm.
the final unwinding of the Roman Empire.
Right.
Okay, like
Oh
this
Right.
has been
yes.
what happens when a major empire like Rome collapses.
Hmm.
You have countries that war with each other and do all of this, and we go, how did Rome just collapse? It didn't. It just changed its face.
Right.
Okay, but the rest of the world, the American empire, we're not Rome. We haven't been around that long, and honestly, we're not collapsing like that. The similarities are really like so surface level that people that say it just make me chuckle. But
Right.
at the same time, there is something huge that everyone is trying to fucking address, and it is the absolute biggest threat to America, to Russia, to China, and that's demographic collapse.
Yeah.
We
Yes.
are dealing with not making enough babies to replace our culture and our populations.
Yeah.
Like
I can
if that
I can
continues to happen, we go the way of the Aztecs. We go the way of the Mayans.
Mm-hmm.
They were also very technologically advanced, very rich, and they're gone.
And it's funny, about 3 years ago for Christmas, I got a present in the mail from Dexter White. You know what it was? It was a
Hmm?
hardbound edition of Pat Buchanan's Death of the West.
Which is I don't like Pat Buchanan as
I
a
wish I had
person, but
friends like
such a
Dexter.
good
Boy.
book.
Right. So there you go. Like it's just we're touching on all these things, and the Russians are dealing with the same thing, and they're trying to. But again, you have to kind of go. Systems don't reform themselves until they're under existential threat of collapse, and then you see, and that's when you see, when a population goes through a bottleneck like the Russians have gone through. That means that they have to. The natural reaction from the species, from life itself is to always then, fight back hard. And they fight back hard with, in this case, it's going to be by making babies. That's what people do.
And understand that people love to ask this question, and nobody ever has an answer that matters. Is people love to go, why is it that every time you bring up making more babies in the U.S., you're equated with Nazis? Or how come every time you're talking about making babies in somewhere else, you're a Zionist? Or this, why is nationalism defined by its hatred of everybody else? Because that is the one problem that no one has been able to address effectively yet is population collapse of
Well,
your own population.
and it's
Okay?
also because also Halsey, it's because you, the people who are promulgating that idea are scared to death of, you know, real people. Those
Not
are
wanting to
people
die.
not wanting to die and not wanting to be part of their system.
Right.
Their system is anti-human. They want only, they want to be able to control us, and they will do everything imaginable to stop it. And people, they keep telling us, no, don't have children, no, don't have this, don't do this, don't do that. We're all living I mean, today, even in America, we're living in, I see it directly in my family. Like, my mother-in-law only had two children because she was told by Ralph Nader not to have more than two kids, and she believed them. She's a dummy. She wanted to have more kids. Like, we're living downstream of this, of a psychological abuse pattern that's been played out against us for like 3 generations, and we're just
Hmm.
starting to awaken to just how big the fucking, I hate to use the word psyop, but that's kind of what it is. And it's the word we all understand how big that program was, and we're now beginning to realize that we have to awaken to, no, we should be out there having babies and having fulfilling lives, and like feminism is bad for women and all of this shit. Like, this is all downstream. All the geopolitics we're dealing with is all downstream of that, because they understood that. Because what else do they have to do with sitting on all of their generational wealth but to think about ways to continue to enslave us, with more and more soft power controls. That's what they have. We have to go out to work every fucking day. All they have to do is sit around and write unreadable white papers and hold conferences that nobody listens, that nobody else but them attends, and then push and pull on the with the quote unquote levers of the world. And again, it comes back to the money, the enforced, the artificial currency arbitrages that where they can create tomorrow's money and pay for yesterday's goods at today's prices. It's the same
Also,
shit every day.
I want Tom. Tom can attest to this. Okay,
Right.
and people hate this message. Just so you know, the more you talk about this message, this is the danger to the system. Is that I have been dragged through the fucking coals over the
Yep.
last few years in the
Yep.
way that they, whoever the big they is, have come after me. And
Hmm.
I have not changed what I've said one day, and I never will. I have 5 children. They're the absolute light of my life, and I would have 5 more tomorrow if I wasn't so old. So what I'm saying is that the message that they want to stop, the message that they want to shame you for, is the idea that you want to have babies. That's why they made it a huge campaign issue, like the right to kill your babies,
Yeah.
and
The
they want
right
you to
to
stay in
the
school
Yep. The
Here
right to
and
on
go
murder.
in
my
debt.
opening
They
arc.
convinced an entire 2 generations of women that it's the highest peak of civilization that they can have the right to murder their unborn child. Think
Yep.
about that. That's the fucking message, and it's disgusting. It's
It really is, and
absolute.
I'm
It's
not a, I'm not a zealot on abortion either. Like I'm not sitting here saying like, no, we
right.
should all go pick at the abortion clinics.
No,
What I'm
no,
saying
absolutely
though
not.
is that they you if you talk about economics,
Hmm.
people will say you're boring. If you talk about race, people will go, oh, you're just a racist. Or if you talk about sexuality, they'll call you a homophobe. But they'll call you all this. But they'll call you names. Maybe they'll deplatform you maybe from social media, a couple other things. But if you start talking about having babies, they will come at you with the fury of 1,000 suns. But the thing
Hmm.
is, if you have them, you'll understand that it doesn't matter. Because
Hmm.
seriously, the amount of people that call into my show or write or do whatever to argue with me that they can't have children because they can't afford it, or they can't have children because they haven't met Mr. or Mrs. Right, or they can't do like every excuse in the sun why they can't have children, but every single one of them will agree that they're exceptionally unhappy because they don't have children.
Well,
And I
then,
can tell you that none of that shit matters. If you have the children, you will find a way to make it work because it's not a goldfish that you'll flush down the toilet. You will feed your kids, no matter what it
yes,
takes.
yes,
You will go out and fight and die for them in a second to keep them safe.
that's
These are
right.
the things they can't control, whoever the they is, that
Yep.
they will come at you with a fury of a fucking 1,000 suns if you get that message that you don't have to be a debt slave, that you don't have to do all of this, that you don't have to go out there and dye your hair purple and say you're not going to have sex unless you have the right to kill your baby. These are the things that if you want to keep it on a surface level, they'll let you talk until the cows come home. But the
Hmm.
second you tell people to start going out and having babies, to get married and take the plunge, regardless of divorce, rape, or any other kind of stupid shit that people come up with to tell you to not have babies, the minute you start talking about having babies and how having babies is the best thing that could ever happen to you, they will come at you in a way that will make your fucking head spin.
Yep. All right, we've got two people requesting to come back in. I'd like to try and get to them. So, Warhound, thank you. That was awesome. And we're gonna
Yep.
move on to I'm gonna go to David and then to Jonathan. All right. So
And then
David,
we're going to be done. It's been a long
yeah,
time, and
yeah,
we'll do
yep,
another one of these, no problem. But
yeah, yeah,
as I
yeah,
said, I
yeah,
got 5 kids. I got things to do.
yeah. So David, you're on the air, and
Okay.
what do you got to
Here's,
say for yourself?
here's some good news about Israel, by the way. Israel is one of the only developed countries that is reproduction positive. I think it's at 3.5 or 3.6, which is kind of interesting because Egypt has fallen to 2.3. But I don't know how in Europe and in other places. Yes, we all want to have children and have babies, but when you torpedo an infrastructure where the grandparents could take care of the grandkids while fathers and
Yep,
mothers went to work,
yep,
you have a whole rebuilding system to do,
hmm,
especially in Europe, much more than the United States. And I hate to say, even in Brazil and the Arab world, believe it or not, is starting to get reproduction negative
hmm,
because the infrastructure of extended families has fallen off.
yep.
So, we can't just snap the fingers and say, well, let's have children. That's one of the reasons I actually think Israel is going to survive, by the way, is because it's
And
reproduction positive.
I just
So,
want you to know something real quick about that. Okay, I have heard a million excuses as to why Israel has an acceptable birth rate. I've heard it's the proliferation of the Orthodox. It's because they're under threat. They are the only people right now in control of a nation that were almost systematically wiped out less than 100 years ago.
Right.
Okay. And when that happens, I don't care. You want to, oh, it's a Holocaust culture. They're always talking about this. They can't get over it, whatever. The one thing they won't stop doing is having babies because they realize that life is short and that things can happen. And the fact that Israel's constantly under threat doesn't help. But I'm just saying that when you have people, I grew up, my two of my grandparents, my mother on my mother's side both survived the Holocaust, and so did their parents. Okay. And when you grow up hearing their stories, it it gets it into your mind that like really horrible shit can happen to a lot of people.
Mhm.
And you might be completely powerless to stop it. Like you hear, oh, why didn't they pick up guns? Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? That's if my aunt had a dick, she'd be my uncle. You know what I'm saying? Like we
Mhm.
could second guess why it happened, but it did happen.
Right.
And now you're seeing that there's a people that's decided they're not willing to die. And you'll see that as the Holocaust survivors die out, the birth rate's going down, even with the proliferation of the ultra orthodox.
Yeah.
So usually what precipitates a population boom is something really horrible happening. And I'm praying the West doesn't go through this.
Right.
Like, obviously, no one's going to Holocaust the West or anything, but I'm just saying a nuclear war could break out tomorrow because we decided that fucking wheat in Ukraine is more important than life. And millions of people could die. And then you know what you'll see? A baby boom.
Oh, you're right.
So.
Remember when we've been in an age with comparatively little wars since
Mhm.
the end of the Second War. Comparatively, there's still been
There
horrible.
hasn't
There's
been
still
any wars. There's
awful.
only been isolated conflict.
Mhm. Yeah.
And maybe the ecosystem was meant that there has to be one of these huge conflagrations every once in a while to reinvigorate. It's a horrible thing to say, but
But history would tell you that you're right about that. History would say you're right. I'm not telling you
And
you are right, but I'm saying history would say you are.
and but I'll say something else to the point about infrastructure and bringing the grandparents back in and everything else. That was the whole point of the managerial state was to destroy the nuclear family. It
Sure.
was, and so roll that back and roll back. Like it's been my argument about abortion. Like I've always said that, look, you know, abortion, the state should not be involved in any way. Yada, yada, yada. Yes, it's murdering children and blah 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 blah. But the way you minimize the actual numbers of abortions that are performed is to build a community that presents enough options for women who feel like they could have the child, because there is a community in which for her to have this child and help and get help raising it, and we've destroyed all of those private functions. We've allowed the state to take those roles on, and the state does a terrible job at it. I'm at the point now where the only when people ask me what's the state good for, I'm like creating black markets and murdering people. Like that's it.
Yep.
And um, you know, I used to say like recording property deeds, but having a wife who used to work as a surveyor, she's like, no, they're not even any good at that, by the way. So like this is we if we roll back all of those barriers to entry to creating small businesses, to creating a vibrant economy, that we can point to all those things from an economic perspective. We can say, well, we have all these regulations, and the cost of safety regulations on like a fucking car company, for example, having to sacrifice cars to do safety testing. That's a huge burden that only large car companies can afford to pay for, and that's the barrier to entry to keeping new car companies from coming in to the space. Well, it's the same thing for basically having babies. If the state confiscates 75%, 65 to 75% of the money you actually earn of 45 minutes at a very hour that you work, you are not going to feel like you have a predictable future in which to bring children into the world. Roll
You're
that back
also
to
worried that they
50.
can continue the benefits that you paying for with that. That your health
Right.
care is going to be there for
Right.
you. That your retirement is going to be there for you.
Right. And so because of that, roll that back to 15 minutes out of every hour and you'll see a baby boom. Because we are actually under siege. We are being predated upon. There is a war going on. That war is a soft war at the managerial and technocracy level. At and it's sapping our creativity, and it's sapping our vibrancy, and it's sapping our desire to live. It's turning us into nihilists because we don't
Yep.
see a future because our time preference has been so shortened that we don't know. Like, dude, I'll be honest with you. I mean, and I'll my last point, and then I'm going to move on to Jonathan, and then we'll get out of here. Which is, look,
No,
I
I gotta
got this
have
moment.
one more Aaron Sorkin movie after you're
Yeah.
done.
So all I'm going to say is, like, I was with my therapist this afternoon, and I said, and we were talking about where my head is right now, and I'm like, I told him, I said, dude, I don't even want to play the drums. I don't even want to get like, I don't want to like get my musical chops back up so I can start recording, some ideas that I have laying around. I spent all this money on the infrastructure and everything else. And I'm like, because I don't know what's going to happen in the next 50 days. Like, until Trump's actually installed in the White House and we can actually start to make the turn that we're actually going to have a future. Like, right now, it's all whiskey and cigars and World of Warcraft for me. Like, it really
Hmm.
is. Like that's where I am. I'm like, I can't predict more than 50 days out at this point. I can't think about the next 10 years or 20 years and everything else. I'm saying this on the same day that my daughter finally confirmed got her first job ever. Like, she just like got a job and she's been trying to get a job for 6 months. So, like, everything is beginning to turn a little bit, and people are beginning to feel a little bit of hope. I got a friend of mine who as a substitute teacher down in the Alachua County school systems in Gainesville, and he's noted a massive change in the children, like the sixth
Oh
graders and
yeah,
the eighth graders, and everything has changed. Like, he's like, the zeitgeist is completely different. On November 6th, the guys were coming in wearing MAGA hats, for Christ's sake, tweaking their friends and their teachers on purpose just to be douches. Like, it's great. Like, something's changed. He's like, and he moonlights as DoorDash as well. And he's like, it used to be only 2 days a week I would actually make any money. Now it's every night. I can't not. I've got, I don't know what to do. The restaurants are full. Everything is changing. And I was like, I was in St. Augustine over the weekend, and it was a different vibe than it was, say, a year ago. Something has
for
fundamentally
sure.
changed, and that is encouraging, because it's going to say to people, oh, we can have babies, we can do this, we can start a small business, we can have our lives back. And the war is, we're winning the culture war, and the culture war is as important as World War III is.
Yeah, but there
Yep.
is
It's
a piece
more
of
important.
there's a piece of good news though. After the so-called medical event, I know from looking in, Halsey certainly knows it from the Orthodox world, where women sat at home with all their children and worked from home. Well, so many people are working from home now that it actually creates an atmosphere for
Yeah,
raising children, and that is the one good thing that came out of the whole medical event. So I'll land
that's
there.
there you
Let
go.
me have my Aaron Sorkin
Sure,
moment real quick.
sure.
I've been doing this with Tom. Me and Tom weren't friends before we started doing these kind of streams and writing together and stuff like that.
Right.
We started this in 2018, I think, or 17
17,
was the first
17.
time. 17. So it's been a little bit, right? Me and Tom were on a stream about a year after we met, maybe a little bit less, and he said, "Oh, I know we meant to do a stream next week, but I can't. It's my birthday, and my family wants to throw me a birthday." I said, "Oh, really? When's your birthday?" And he told me, and I said, "Huh, "That so's mine." Right?
Yeah,
And turns
right.
out we had the exact same birthday. About a year later, he said to me, "I know we had a stream planned for tomorrow, but I can't. I have to go out with my wife for her birthday." And I said, "Really? When's her birthday?" And he told me, and I said, "Oh my God, so is mine." And then as we went on, Tom has his happiness. I've had my problems. Like, I don't want to get into the dynamics of my family or anything like that. But I talk to Tom. We can go 6 months without talking. We can go 6 minutes without talking.
Right.
But there's always going to be a conversation about what our kids are doing or are up to or anything. And I'm telling you, they've never met, because I've never met Tom. So it's a different world when you have something to live for outside of just your own happiness.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Hmm.
when you're building something that, even if life throws you the most horrible curveballs, or even if something you thought was going to last forever fucking completely breaks down,
Yep.
you know, it's something else. And I talk about it on my streams, and people give me shit. And I keep saying, because the answer to demographic collapse is babies.
Yep.
But what about this? What about having enough money? It's babies. If you want lots of babies, you'll have lots of babies, and then you'll figure out a way to feed them. I promise you.
Yep.
Well, that's because you're Orthodox. No, it has nothing to do. It has to do
No.
with that you will not let your children starve. You will live in a fucking dishwasher box
Yeah. No.
before you're going to let that happen.
Agreed. Agreed. All right. I agree with you completely. I've
Hmm.
been there. I know what it feels like. I know what it feels like to try and keep a family together or making $12,000 a year in
Hmm.
America for 2 years, and it sucked. And I did it, and I didn't like it. And we came together, and we did what we needed to do, and and you do the thing, and hopefully you figure it out, and you come out the other side of it, and
Hmm.
and then you say to yourself, okay, it sucked, but maybe you're not the person today without that experience that you are. That you wouldn't be that person today that you are without that experience, and you have to take that. And it's an argument you can make about why Trump had to lose in 2020 as an aside. Let's go to Jonathan, and then we'll get out of
But
here.
real quick though, you'll also
Yeah,
notice that
yes.
every time you go through one of those times in life where you think this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me, how am I ever going to get through it? It
Mhm.
almost always transforms into one of the best things that's ever happened
Not in my case, but
to you.
maybe.
Look where you are now, dude.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it all depends on your frame. It all depends on the frame of reference. I think that, but
Sure,
I'll leave it there. But that's fine. It may be different for different people. But that's fine.
sure.
So let's go to Jonathan, and then we'll cut this thing off, and we'll give everybody a break, and then we'll
Did
go from there. All right, Jonathan, you're on the air. How you doing,
we lose him?
Jonathan? No, let's try it again.
Yeah, I'm
Yep, there you
here.
go. There you go.
Yeah, just wanted to chime in on Middle East peace prospects. How much of a big role can Russia play when it comes to settling matters when it comes to Israel and Palestine? I
None.
mean, contra- I
None.
mean, con- I mean, like, I mean, because Russia has got a lot of has got a lot of has got a lot of interest in Israel, in Israel's continued existence. So they have a lot of large Russian Jewish population and in the country of Israel and all that, and they've been actively negotiating for the release of the hostages, is with Hamas. Us and all that. So I kind of wonder, like Trump comes into office and all that. He's been beating his chest about getting Hamas about getting those hostages released. What could Vladimir Putin offer him in that regard?
I can answer that question easily. Vladimir Putin and the United States can offer absolutely nothing because there's only one thing historically that brings peace, and that's the end of a war. Afterwards, everyone can chime in and jump in and offer their suggestions and assist with the little stuff, but peace only comes at the end of a war. And the longer you drag that out, the longer you believe you could negotiate a peace with two people who hate each other, the longer you drag out the war and it becomes Chinese border torture.
Hmm.
Okay, and you just see people die of 1,000 cuts as opposed to just dying in a big war. We're at that inflection point right now because there are a bunch of huge wars that are coming to an end, and you're going to see a geopolitical realignment.
Hmm.
How Putin and the US can play into it, they can offer suggestions. They can include the Israelis or the Palestinians or the Syrians or the Lebanese in any kind of plans they have and say, well, maybe we can move forward here or there or whatever. But what's going to change the landscape is the fact that this was a big fucking war
Yep.
and a lot of people died and a lot of things were destroyed. And now you're going to see a realignment, and it's going to be based on not mutual interest, but on selfish interest, which is how wars end and how
Well,
peace occurs.
on
Agreed.
another side of that is to say, how can Russia and the United States influence this by getting their relationship worked out?
Yep,
You guys were
100%.
everybody. Look, hey, if Russia and the United States work out their differences, and that then sends a signal to everybody else because hey, if they're not going to, I've just been my argument for a long time, and this goes back to like you and I talking about this shit back in 2018 about saying, look, there's a possibility for a grand bargain here if everybody would just be willing to, you know, you know, be rational.
Agreed.
But
I've been listening to you, Tom, since 2018. I'm often on a subscriber on Patreon, so
I know.
I remember those conversations.
Mhm. And I think that in this, for the listening audience that may have not heard this, when Halsey and I were talking about this exact grand bargain 6 years ago, and we also
Yep,
said, both of us said many times that Netanyahu has to play his cards right, or he's going to get the Jews wiped out in Israel. He has to be very careful how he plays his cards because he's beset on all sides. And the last thing anybody wants to see happen is that. Like you have to play this properly, and the Russians have to play their hand properly and everything else. But as I said earlier, about an hour and a half ago, imagine a world where the United States and Russia have no formal presence in a whole strip, starting
Military
from
presence.
military
Military
presence,
presence.
military presence from just west of the Donbass, starting up, up north in northern Belarus and going all the way down to the Gulf of Aden. And imagine what that looks like as a kind of demilitarized zone between the Russians and the United States. And all of a sudden, everybody gets peace religion real fucking fast because they know they can't
Yep.
get the big boys to come in and play their games for them and back their stupid reindeer games. And the problem and the last point I want to make on this is that the Russians fight war differently than the West does. Everybody thinks that this resolves to a game of chess. This is not a game of chess. As I've said many times,
Nope.
this is a multiplayer game of Go. The
Hmm.
Russians are willing to sacrifice territory to play the long game and play the game of attrition because that's how they've traditionally won every war they've ever won. As Dexter White said to me at the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war, he's like, Russia's never won a war that it hasn't lost first.
Yep.
Okay? On paper. So that's the way the Russians operate. The Russians understand how to beat the Western Europe aggression, and that is you just bleed them out. And the West likes, and so in many ways, when the Russians do this, they imply in a game of Go, you imply a conflict in an area, and then you let that, and then they say, well, okay, let's fight there, and then the Americans go, yes, let's fight there, or the British say we have to fight over every piece of territory because we are the ones with more resources, and we always play the game from the perspective of we have all these resources, we're going to overwhelm them with resources over time, and we're going to fight for every inch of space because backing down makes no sense when you can always bring more shit to the table, right? You can always just keep throwing more troops or more material or more money at the problem because you have more. And so,
I
how do
want
you?
to give it. Well, let me give one example for you too.
Sure,
That when the Nazis charged into Russia and started to fight in, I think it was St. Petersburg, right?
right,
The Nazis had things that the Russians couldn't even dream of, and they had
hmm,
resources to provide for their troops that the Russians couldn't even dream of. You know
right,
what Stalin did? He told his Russians, the first line wave of you that are going to charge into St. Petersburg, you get the guns. The
yes,
guys behind you, you don't get anything. And when someone falls, you pick up his gun, and if you
yeah,
turn around, we'll shoot you from the other side.
yeah. That
And
is,
guess what? They did it.
yeah. So this is, and that is actually um, um, dramatized in the movie Enemy at the Gates. If you've never seen it,
It was a
it's
great
about
movie.
It's a great movie. It's a Stalin, and about Stalingrad, and it is a great movie, and that's exactly what happens. Like there's a scene in there in that movie that does exactly that, right? Um, and but my point is that we having technological superiority, the way your best way of fighting that war is to keep throwing material and men and everything else into the conflict because eventually you'll wear the other guy out. It's like Risk. I'm making 15 troops per round. You're making 8. I'll keep, you know, I'll just keep throwing guys at you until I eventually break down the Middle East and I'll break down your Asia and then I'll take over the rest of the board. Right? Well, maybe because what if you keep losing? Because remember, in Risk, the ties go to the defender. So the defender attrits by not advancing and just constantly reinforcing. And eventually, if things go your way, you eventually wear the other guy out. You get built up to the point where you can attack them in a different theater, or eventually they just weaken themselves enough that somebody other player at the table takes them out. And so, how do you beat a technologically or or logistically superior opponent? you put them into a position where they always think they can win, but they really can't. And this is what the Russians have been doing in Ukraine for 2 years, making it look like they can't take territory. They can. If the Russians wanted to take all the land east of the Dnieper River, they could. They could put 400,000 troops
Easily,
on the fucking
easily.
line, all easily. They just have to put 400,000 troops on the line and boom, and blow the whole fucking thing wide open. Any one of 6 fucking fronts on that line of contact. They're not doing it on purpose because they understand the psychology of the people that they're fighting against, who always interpret the lack of commitment as weakness, and or any amount of humanity as weakness, and so they always come in and say we just need to throw another $50 billion in there and and the Russians will collapse. We just know it, and the Russians aren't even putting their frontline troops, their best troops, into play, or their best technology, or their best bombs, or their best artillery, or anything else. And it's silly, and it
The
speaks
Russians
to
get more,
hubris,
the
and it
Russians get more
speaks.
bang for their buck.
And in that respect, they get more bang for their buck, and that's what they're doing. And that's how you beat a superior opponent. You make them think that they can win,
Something
and
that
then
they have no possibility of winning.
of winning. It's
If I
the
may offer, if I may offer
so
one more thing, once the Russians and the Americans work out their relationship, could Putin and Trump work on decapitating the city of London, like metaphorically speaking?
that's already happening.
It's already
That's what,
happening, but you won't see it formally happen in 4
yeah.
years.
You won't see it
It's
formally
way too
happen.
short a timeline.
Well, and more importantly, it's not Trump and Putin's job to do that. It's Jerome Powell's
No,
job. It's Wall
Right,
Street.
right.
It's Wall Street and the Federal Reserve's job to do that, and they are doing that very effectively.
and you know
Ah,
who they've got? Like the greatest sign of that is that Jamie Dimon is on board. Who would have ever thought that?
Me.
Yeah, I know, I agree, but I actually
No,
said it too. But
yeah, no, I know, but no, and the Bank of Japan,
yeah, the
and
Bank of
Japan.
Japan pulled off a fucking coup. We'll get into it next time, but
Mhm.
man, what they pulled off a year ago, will have economists writing books about for the next
Mhm.
fucking 2 decades.
I know, it's great. All right, guys, I think that was successful. Also, actually,
Yeah, three
um,
hours, not bad.
holy shit, dude, I am so fucking tired. I am not doing any media. I'm doing zero media tomorrow. Fuck that noise. Okay, so
I got a whole bunch going on, so I'll be very around tomorrow.
all right. Well, sorry, Joey. We have one last request, but we're gonna have to cut this off for next time, folks. Thank you all
sure.
for
Thank you,
showing
Tom.
up.
Thank you, Halsey.
Guys,
Appreciate
you
it.
can find Tom at goldgoatsandguns.com. You can find me at YouTube at Halsey English or on my Twitter page. Please reach out, ask any questions if you want. If you have some topics you want us to bring up or to embellish on, we both never shut up.
Yeah,
We're
we really do.
Italians and Jews, and this isn't the kind of thing that we do good at, being quiet.
Yeah, being
So
quiet, we're terrible at
yeah, right. Okay, guys,
it.
have a great night.
Enjoy. Take care. Bye bye.
My fellow Americans, tonight I am speaking to you because there is a growing humanitarian and security crisis at our southern border.
In all honesty, a border wall or steel slats won't work. But great bodies of water will separate us from the horrible Mexican rapists. Introducing the 2019 Trump Great Border Moat. Stocked with the most aggressive penis fish, incredible man-eating alligators, and unbelievable genetically modified moose-cocked rape dolphins, as well as flying, migrant-eating sharkfish. So incredible.
I swore to protect our country, and that is what I will always do. So help me God. Thank you and good night.